Hey guys, tonight we drift into the soft, golden dusk along the banks of the Nile. The sun has just begun to slip behind a distant line of palm trees, casting a shimmering reflection over the lazy, rippling river. A warm breeze curls across your skin, scented faintly with lotus blossoms, stirred mud, and distant cooking fires. Insects chirp softly in the reeds. You're barefoot, of course. Sandals are for people who don't like feeling the cool kiss of wet earth between their toes. And somewhere up ahead, near a patch of shade under a fig tree, your date is waiting. Or maybe not, maybe they're late. Or maybe they were never coming at all. Because welcome, dear traveller, to the love life of ancient Egypt, a world that smells incredible, feels magical, and comes with just enough awkward tension to remind you that humans have always been a little weird about romance. You probably won't survive this, at least not emotionally. The heartaches, the ancient pickup lines, the accidental love spells gone wrong. It's all here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it by you? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk through the narrow alleyways of Thebes, the capital in the New Kingdom, where the homes are made of mud brick and the streets smell like a stew of spices, fish, and warm dust. It's early evening, prime time for socializing. The workday is over, the marketplaces are winding down, and the Nile has begun to cool. People are pouring out into the streets with jugs of beer, baskets of dates, and just enough eyeliner to make things interesting. Love here doesn't quite look the way you've been sold in modern rom-coms. There are no dramatic rooftop confessions, no boomboxes held aloft. But there's a rhythm to it just the same. You might catch someone's eye as they pass by with a tray of bread. Maybe they wink at you, or maybe a speck of sand got in their eye. It's hard to say. Either way, you follow them with your gaze, pretending not to. In this world, love begins with proximity. Families lived close together, often in clusters of generations, which meant that your future spouse might have also been your childhood playmate. Romantic? Or just practical? Historians still argue whether love or logistics came first in these arrangements. Still, there was love, the kind that bloomed slowly like papyrus in a marsh. Egyptian love poems, some of which survive on crumbling shards of pottery, are tender, awkward, and unexpectedly funny. One young man wrote that just seeing his beloved made his limbs tremble like reeds in the breeze. Another claimed that her voice was like beer. Honestly, we respect the priorities. Tonight, you pass by a courtyard where a group of girls are dancing barefoot in the sand, their hair swinging in glossy braids, singing some half-remembered hymn to Hathor, goddess of beauty and joy. Their laughter curls into the sky like incense smoke. A few boys linger nearby, pretending to adjust their tunics, which don't actually need adjusting. It's a performance everyone's in on. You turn onto a quieter lane, where a lone scribe leans against a low wall, scratching something into a piece of limestone. He's writing a love note, no doubt, a flirtatious jab, a poetic plea, or maybe a biting, "I saw you with her at the market" kind of line. Petty? Perhaps eternal? Absolutely, because while Egyptian culture prized family, stability, and duty, it also made space for that soft, trembling feeling in the chest. Love was dangerous, love was divine, love was inconvenient, and yet it shows up over and over in art, in songs, even in tomb inscriptions. Husbands and wives wanted to be buried together. Couples described each other not just as spouse, but as beloved. And no matter the time or class, evenings like this, warm, slow, fragrant, were where love tiptoed in. The Nile, meanwhile, moves steadily beside you. Back then it wasn't just a river. It was a god, a lifeline, a place to flirt. Picture two teenagers tossing pebbles at each other on the bank while pretending to wash clothes, or a young woman deliberately losing her necklace near a group of fishermen, a not-so-subtle invitation. You smile, imagining the ancient equivalent of a double tap on a profile picture. One quirky detail about ancient Egyptian dating: they had no word for dating. There was no formal courtship stage the way modern society defines it. People simply grew up near each other, noticed each other, and, if families approved, began sharing food, homes, and eventually lineage. But that doesn't mean they didn't have preferences. Some liked their partners dark and statuesque like the god Anubis. Others were drawn to softness, kindness, or a good laugh. A man might say, "Her voice makes my heart dance." Not bad for 3,000 years ago. Historians still debate whether casual flings were common outside of religious festivals, or whether most romances were nudged toward marriage. But evidence from love spells and poems suggests that passion often got ahead of planning. And now you're pausing at a public garden, rare and luxurious in this arid land. The air here is thick with jasmine and the earthy musk of crocodile dung. Yes, used back then as mosquito repellent and occasionally in beauty treatments. Your modern skincare routine suddenly feels tame, doesn't it? You hear music, a flute, maybe a lute, and the hum of conversation. A feast is beginning. Someone has roasted goose. A jug of date wine is being passed around. Eyes are meeting across the table, with that age-old expression. Are you eating that? Here, under the moonlight, you sit on woven mats beside strangers who feel familiar, wrapped in linen, dappled with oil, and half drunk on the night itself. Someone tells a joke in a dialect you don't understand, and yet you laugh. And just before you nod off, just before your head leans back into your hands, and the stars begin to spin slowly above, you remember. This is love, ancient and odd, messy and sacred. This is where it all begins. And tomorrow you'll wake up married to someone your cousin picked out for you while you were busy daydreaming about the lute player. But that's tomorrow's problem. For tonight, you rest beside the Nile. The morning after your riverside evening feels a little different. The light is brighter than you remembered, and the scent of bread baking wafts from somewhere nearby, mixing with the distinct smell of fresh fish and sun-warmed clay. You stretch, brush specks of straw from your tunic, and squint at the growing bustle in the narrow street just outside your doorway. The truth is dawning slowly and unmistakably. Your cousin really did introduce you to someone last night, and now your entire family seems to be preparing for a wedding. Not a big wedding, mind you. Those were reserved for royalty or very rich merchants. But enough of a to-do that there's already a woman outside grinding barley into flour, another sketching out where the canopy should go, and an aunt, you're not even sure whose aunt, taking aggressive measurements of your shoulders. Marriage, in ancient Egypt, wasn't always the romantic high point of a relationship. In fact, it often came before love even had a chance to stretch its legs. Families arranged marriages as contracts, social, economic, and sometimes political. It was far less about butterflies and far more about barley. You glanced toward the person you apparently agreed to marry or were volunteered to marry. They're across the courtyard, chatting with a priest, totally unbothered. You try to remember their name. Something with an M, maybe. See, in ancient Egyptian society, marriage didn't require an elaborate ceremony or even a priest. There wasn't a formal religious ritual like you might expect. No parade down an aisle, no vows before a divine altar. Often, it was as simple as a woman moving into a man's house and the community acknowledging the new arrangement. You just kind of started being married. Some historians argue whether the average marriage involved any formal announcement at all. There's a theory that weddings in the modern sense are more a Western invention, and that ancient Egyptian unions relied more on shared living arrangements and economic cooperation. Others believe there may have been small celebrations, music, food, and definitely alcohol, but not necessarily a ceremony anyone would recognize today. What mattered more than the party was the agreement. The actual legal standing came from contracts, written documents that laid out exactly what each person brought to the table, sometimes literally. There were clauses like, he gives her 5 sacks of grain, and if he divorces her, he owes her 1/3 of the house's value. Romantic? maybe not. Practical? Extremely. And those contracts? Women signed them. Women in ancient Egypt had more rights than in many other ancient societies. They could own property, inherit land, initiate divorce, and even keep custody of their children, which means, yes, if your new spouse decides they don't like how you snore, they could legally kick you out and keep the goat. Still, not every marriage was so transactional. You hear that some people, scandalous as it sounds, actually married for love. Some poetry even hints that couples who loved each other before marriage were considered lucky. A fragment from one surviving poem reads, "She is more beautiful than any woman, and I could not stop my feet from returning to her street." Oh, of course some marriages were arranged before either party hit puberty. It wasn't uncommon for girls to marry around 12 or 13 and boys a few years older. You're expected to start a family early after all. This also meant that parents, especially the mother, had a huge say in the match. If you're imagining awkward teenage engagement negotiations complete with a nervous boy showing up at the house with a goose and an apology, you wouldn't be far off. Let's not forget the stakes. Marriage wasn't just about two people. It was about lineage, inheritance, and social stability. If your family had land, property, or even a decent cow, you needed to make sure it passed into the right hands. And that meant strategic matchmaking, like ancient agricultural chess. Royal families took this to another level. To protect bloodlines, pharaohs often married within their own family. Sisters, half-sisters, sometimes even daughters, yes. Deep breath. Historians still argue whether these relationships were always consummated or whether they were symbolic, but either way, they served a purpose. Keep power in the family. And before you judge too harshly, remember, dynasties were everything. A pharaoh without a legitimate heir risked civil war, so if the solution was, well, marrying your sister, then so be it. Your own situation is suddenly looking less awkward, isn't it? Back in your courtyard, someone's setting out baskets of figs and soft white bread. A jug of beer is poured. Your soon-to-be in-laws are arriving, arms full of linens and wide smiles. Someone starts up a tune on a reed pipe. It's happening. You remind yourself, this doesn't have to be forever. In ancient Egypt, divorce was not only allowed, it was common. If things didn't work out, both parties could go their separate ways. Property would be divided, contracts revisited, and hopefully no curses would be flung, though let's be real, someone's mother would mutter something to the gods. That freedom gave marriage a slightly different feel. Less, till death do us part, more, let's see how this goes. And maybe that's why people approached it with a mix of realism and ritual, preparing not just for joy, but for the possibility that things might change. You step forward, nodding politely to your betrothed. They're holding a small bouquet of blue water lilies, the ancient equivalent of roses, symbolic of life and rebirth. A nice touch. You offer a quiet greeting. They smile, and it's not a bad smile. Not at all. And somewhere, as the music lilts and the warm sun paints everything in golden tones, you wonder, maybe love will come later, maybe it won't. But for now, you have bread, beer, and blue lilies. And honestly, there are worse ways to begin a life together. You wake the next day to the quiet clatter of clay pots and someone sweeping the threshold with a palm-frond broom. There's a roasted duck in the corner, wrapped in lotus leaves, and a jug of wine by the door that someone probably meant to hide better. Your head's a little foggy from last night's toasts. Every time someone said to prosperity, someone else handed you another drink. But you're married now, probably, or at least you've moved in with someone and their uncle gave a thumbs up, which is more or less the same thing here. And as you roll out of bed, the scent of myrrh and cinnamon oil tickles your nose. Your new spouse is already up, grinding a paste in a shallow dish with careful, practiced strokes. Love in ancient Egypt was rarely spontaneous, it was prepared. And in a culture where physical attraction was closely tied to cleanliness and smell, scented oils and perfumes were weapons of the heart. You lean closer. The mixture smells like sycamore sap, coriander, and something sharp and floral, possibly marjoram. They're making perfume. And not just any perfume, this could be for you. In ancient Egypt, fragrance was seduction. The hot climate and relentless sun meant people sweat a lot, and while bathing was a regular routine thanks to the proximity of the Nile, perfumed oils were how you signaled elegance, health, and yes, romantic availability. Temples had entire wings dedicated to crafting incense and perfume. Recipes were inscribed on papyri and stone. Some formulas required months of preparation, flowers soaked in oil, resins melted over coals, all pressed and filtered through linen until only the most seductive essence remained. Women wore wax cones of perfume on their heads at parties, designed to melt slowly, releasing aroma over the course of the evening. Imagine dating someone who literally wore a slow-drip fragrance hat just to smell nice around you. That's commitment. And love spells? Oh, there were plenty. You couldn't walk 10 steps in a market without someone offering you a charm to capture someone's heart or ensure fidelity. These were inscribed on shards of pottery, hidden in bread, burned with incense, or worn in amulets. The most popular ingredient, crocodile fat, the less romantic cousin of roses. One curious spell involved writing your beloved's name in ochre on your left hand, then clenching it during a full moon while whispering their name to the goddess Hathor. If your palm tingled, congratulations, they loved you back. If it didn't, well, maybe you clenched wrong. Or maybe they were into someone else. Historians still argue whether these spells were meant literally or were more symbolic rituals of emotional control. But many surviving texts point to a genuine belief in their power, especially when it came to jealousy, obsession, or lost love. Your spouse now offers you a dab of the perfume. You lean in, letting the warm oil touch your collarbone. It's earthy, musky, and oddly calming. You say, "Thank you." They just smile, then return to kneading the dough for breakfast. Small gestures like this were how affection often showed up. Quiet, practical, fragrant. As the day warms, you step out into the sun-baked courtyard, where a neighbor is airing out linens, and a young girl is braiding her mother's hair with blue beads. A man walks by carrying a live goose under his arm. He nods. You nod back. Just another Tuesday. Now, if you were truly trying to woo someone, say, a secret crush, or a partner in a higher social class, you'd need more than a wink and some oil. That's where love, charms, and potions came into play. A particularly odd one, recorded in an ancient scroll now sitting in a museum, instructed the user to burn a lock of the desired person's hair with frankincense while chanting, "Let their heart burn like this hair." Another recipe involved figs mashed with honey and smeared on the threshold of a crush's home. If they stepped over it, apparently their heart would be yours. Sound a bit sticky? Yes. But when you're in love, logic takes a holiday. Even in 1500 BCE, even gods got involved. Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty, and music, was often invoked in matters of the heart. Her temples became destinations for love petitions. Couples left offerings of mirrors, combs, and beads, asking her for luck in marriage or fertility. Some even carved their prayers right into the temple walls. "May I win his heart," one inscription reads, "as the falcon wins the sky." Poetic, desperate, and possibly written at 2 a.m. You walk past one of these shrines now. It's modest, just a shaded alcove in the street, but people have left flower petals and worn necklaces on the stone ledge. The air smells like rose oil and smoke. You linger a moment, then move on. There's also the matter of cosmetics. Men and women both wore makeup, not just for beauty, but for health and protection. Kohl eyeliner wasn't just fashion, it helped reduce glare from the sun and repel flies, but it also highlighted the eyes, emphasized emotion, and added a certain something to a gaze across a courtyard. A smoky eye has always been dangerous. One ostracon, a pottery shard used for casual writing, features a drawing of a man giving a woman a bouquet and the caption, "The one with the pretty eyes." Sometimes love was simple. Back at home, your spouse has set the table. There's beer, light, frothy and vaguely sour, alongside salted fish, fresh flatbread, and a bowl of lentils with garlic. No candlelight, no harp music, just food, shared in the heat of the day with someone who smells like sap and coriander and might not be too bad after all. They offer you a fig, sliced down the center, you accept. Later, as the light fades and the cicadas begin their nightly rhythm, you sit outside, legs stretched, arms resting on the low wall. A couple walks by, laughing. One flicks the other's ear playfully. The same dance repeated for millennia. In ancient Egypt, love didn't always arrive with fanfare. It crept in through gestures, through scent, through shared bread and softened gazes. It whispered through rituals and danced in the smoke of incense. And tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, you think of that ochre name-on-hand spell and wonder, not about who you love, but who might be clenching their hand for you. The morning sun pours through a reed mat curtain, casting striped shadows across the packed earth floor. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing. A low, rhythmic hum that melts into the background like the trickle of water through a canal. You blink slowly, your limbs warm and heavy. The scent of yesterday's perfume still lingers faintly on your tunic, but something new hums in the air today. Tension. Not between you and your spouse, surprisingly, but in the neighborhood itself, because last night the potter's daughter ran away with the merchant's apprentice, and no one, not even the priest of Khonsu, knows exactly where they went. Now don't panic. This kind of drama isn't exactly rare in ancient Egypt, but it does highlight something important. Love didn't always follow the rules, and society had very particular expectations about who could marry whom. In theory, love was celebrated. In practice, it had boundaries, mostly drawn by class, gender, and family reputation. And when love leapt those fences, things got complicated. Take a moment to imagine you're not a middle-class scribe or craftsperson, but rather a palace cook. Skilled, yes, but firmly placed in the servant class. You pass nobles all the time. You bring them food, refill their goblets, wash their linens. One day, the daughter of a high-ranking official lingers too long near your olive stall at the market. Her hand brushes yours, a smile, a spark. You both pretend nothing happened because you know the rules. You don't marry up. Ancient Egyptian society wasn't rigidly immobile, but upward love was frowned upon. Marriages were often confined to one's own social strata. Noble married noble. Artisan married artisan. Even scribes, the clever, literate middle class, tended to stick with their own. It wasn't just about money or land, it was about lineage, purity, and keeping reputations tidy. Historians still debate how much wiggle room there really was. Some records suggest that love occasionally trumped structure, particularly in more remote communities where fewer marriage options existed. But in the major cities like Memphis or Thebes, it was less about who you wanted and more about what the family ledger said. And speaking of ledgers, dowries weren't always involved, but gift-giving at the time of union was a common custom. A man might present his future in-laws with offerings: goats, textiles, jewelry, wine. These weren't exactly purchases, but they signified respect, intention, and one's ability to provide. The fancier the gifts, the more seriously you were taken. One of the stranger love arrangements was when a wealthy woman married a poorer man. While not unheard of, these matches flipped social expectations. In such unions, the woman might retain full control over her property, basically saying, "You're welcome to move in, but touch my granaries and I'll set the cat on you." Egyptian cats, mind you, were divine, and also slightly judgmental. Still, love could cross boundaries, sometimes with a little divine help. The goddess Isis, queen of magic, was believed to unite souls across impossible odds. In her myth, she resurrected her murdered husband Osiris, piecing his body together, except for one key piece that got lost in the Nile. Yes, that piece. And conceiving a child in an act of sacred, posthumous love. If she could do all that, surely two people from different classes could find a way. Why, of course, if you did fall for someone inappropriate, there were ways to try and tilt the odds. Love spells written on linen strips could be buried at crossroads. Whispered petitions to deities could be made at shrines in the dead of night. And let's not forget our old friend the fertility doll, carved from wax, doused in oil, and slipped under the intended's bed. One fringe document even details a curse written by a scorned lover who suspected their partner of loving someone from a house of higher rank. The curse calls on a jackal-headed demon to sour the honey in their mouth. Harsh. But not every forbidden love ended in curses or scandal. Some just fizzled quietly, a longing glance, a polite nod, 1,000 unsent love notes tucked under reed mats. Today, as you make your way to the marketplace just to pick up some garlic and lentils, nothing romantic, you pass a young woman with sun-darkened skin and a stack of papyrus scrolls tied at her waist. She glances at you, not shy, not forward, just curious. You nod, politely. Nothing more. Because she's the daughter of a record keeper, and you're married now, and your mother-in-law is probably hiding behind a pillar. But in your head you wonder, what if? One of the most human things about ancient Egyptian love is just how familiar it feels. Despite the rules, the contracts, the dynastic pressure, people still crushed, people still dreamed. A stonemason might scribble a heart on the inside of a brick. A servant might whistle too long near a noble's garden. A girl might smear extra coal on her eyes, hoping a certain fish vendor would notice. And sometimes they got away with it. A scribbled poem found near the workers' village of Deir el-Medina reads, "I passed your house 3 times today. The cat watched me all 3 times. You did not." Ah, the agony of being ghosted in 1300 BCE. You arrive at the market just as the sun crests over the rooftops. Sellers are shouting prices, waving flies away, and pushing dried dates into little baskets. Someone plays a flute. Someone else drops a melon. It's chaotic and alive, full of voices, smells, and potential. And among the crowd you spot a couple walking hand in hand, young, smiling, not from the same class you can tell by their clothes, but clearly defying the odds. Maybe they're foolish, or maybe they're just in love. You pick up your garlic and lentils, pretend not to notice the melon you just stepped on, and begin the walk home. Behind you, the flute continues, shrill and sweet, drifting over the Nile breeze. Because love, no matter how many rules it breaks, finds a way to play its tune. You return home from the market, balancing your basket of garlic and lentils, your thoughts still snagged on the young couple you saw walking hand in hand. They looked far too relaxed for 2 people probably getting judgmental stares from half the town. Maybe that's the trick, you just stop caring, or maybe you've gone soft. Either way, you step back into the courtyard with a little more curiosity about what exactly love was supposed to look like in ancient Egypt. Because if today taught you anything, it's that love wasn't necessarily about the couple, it was about the heir. In this world, love and lineage were uneasy bedfellows. The moment 2 people became married, legally, contractually, or just socially, the countdown began. Children weren't optional, they were the point. And not just any children, sons. Strong, smart, legitimate sons who could carry the name, inherit the house, and offer bread to your spirit when you were dead. That's right. Your ability to reach the afterlife in comfort literally depended on whether your kids liked you enough to keep feeding your ghost. Welcome to the ancient Egyptian estate planning strategy. Have lots of children, raise at least one who doesn't resent you, and hope they can read the Book of the Dead. Your spouse greets you with a nod and takes the garlic from your hand without a word. You get the feeling they're in the middle of something. And sure enough, there on the table are 2 tiny sandals, half-stitched, next to a tiny clay rattle. You raise an eyebrow. They smile. And suddenly there it is. The next stage of love in ancient Egypt. Parenthood. Having children wasn't just expected, it was how you cemented your social identity. In fact, your title in later life often reflected your kids more than yourself. A woman might be called mother of the scribe, or a man might be known as father of the baker. Your job, irrelevant. Your offspring, everything. But here's the kicker. Ancient Egyptians weren't entirely sure how conception worked. Yes, they had theories, many of them charmingly off base. One common belief was that the heart, not the brain, controlled all bodily functions, including reproduction. Another theory held that semen passed through the bones to reach the womb, which honestly sounds like something someone would say when they're too embarrassed to ask real questions. Despite the mystery, they were deeply invested in fertility. Amulets shaped like frogs, hippos, and even standing male figures, use your imagination, were worn to boost baby-making energy. Offerings were made to Taweret, the protective goddess of childbirth, depicted as a pregnant hippo with lion limbs and crocodile tail, basically the Swiss Army knife of fertility deities. Historians still argue whether couples turned to these icons more out of faith or desperation. But when things went wrong, when a child didn't come or didn't survive, love was tested, and not just emotionally, legally. If a woman could not bear children after a certain time, her husband was allowed, often encouraged, to take another wife or concubine. In wealthier homes, there might be a secondary partner already in place, waiting quietly in another room, sharpening her eyeliner. Of course, some women took matters into their own hands. One papyrus tells of a woman who secretly adopted her sister's child and passed it off as her own, an ancient fertility workaround that required both stealth and a very cooperative sister. And then there's the matter of inheritance. If your marriage was blessed with children, you had to choose who would get what. That might sound obvious, but when a man had children with multiple women, things got dicey fast. There are surviving wills where the phrase, "to my favourite wife's son, not the other one," is written, barely veiling the drama. You're watching your spouse now, fingers deftly stitching a baby wrap, and you wonder if this is what it looked like for most couples, a quiet, daily hope. A gesture here, a prayer there, the future swaddled in linen and lavender. Later that evening, you wander past a small shrine to Bes, the squat, bow-legged god of households, music, and protection of children. He's the kind of deity you'd want babysitting, ugly, loud, fond of tambourines. People painted his image over their beds to ward off nightmares, miscarriages, and bad vibes in general. There's a little bowl in front of his statue, filled with offerings, a date, a tiny ring, a curl of baby hair. You pause and leave a few dried beans, just in case, because while love was the spark, children were the anchor, and those children were the ones who'd eventually perform your funeral rites, who'd speak your name during the Feast of the Valley, who'd pour water on your grave to keep your spirit comfortable in the afterlife. That's why tomb inscriptions often include things like, "He who did not beget a son is forgotten." No pressure. But if you did have children, if your love resulted in a squirmy, opinionated, occasionally sticky heir, you weren't off the hook yet. You now had to raise them properly, teach them the wisdom of Ma'at, cosmic balance, ensure they could read, write, and offer bribes when needed, and above all, make sure they didn't turn out to be the kind of person who'd cheap out on your tomb. You look up at the stars that night, lying flat on the roof under a thin linen sheet, the air still thick and warm. Somewhere in the village a baby is crying, a dog howls back, the wind smells like acacia smoke. You wonder what your own child might be like. Would they inherit your terrible singing voice, your spouse's clever hands? Will they write your name on a coffin board one day and decorate it with gold leaf? Or will they forget, skip the offerings and leave you to sulk in the underworld without lunch? Time will tell. But for now, love in Egypt means preparing, stitching sandals, whispering to gods, feeding the future, and hoping, just hoping, that one day someone will still say your name when the stars come out. The day begins with a procession of voices floating in from the street, vendors calling out prices, children arguing over a clay ball, the shriek of a chicken that probably just realized it was dinner. You stir beneath a thin linen sheet, half listening, half dreaming. You dreamed of water last night. Or was it ink? As you rise and pad toward the doorway, You catch sight of something curious, your neighbour, a priest's assistant, sitting cross-legged on the ground, surrounded by scrolls and bits of pottery. He's scribbling something with furious concentration, brow furrowed, mouth moving silently. He doesn't look up when you pass, but you recognize the signs. He's writing a love poem. Ancient Egyptians didn't just feel love, they wrote it, sang it, and carved it into stone. They whispered it into the ears of statues and painted it on tomb walls. Their love was documented not in the stiff, formal language of political treaties, but in the soft, strange metaphors of the heart. You pause in your steps and lean against the wall. The smell of baked dates drifts by. Somewhere in the city, a temple bell chimes softly. The love poems of ancient Egypt are among the oldest in the world, and many of them have survived, scratched onto bits of limestone pressed into papyrus, preserved in jars that somehow escaped the decay of centuries. And they're surprisingly familiar. My heart flutters hastily when I think of you, one writes. It lets me not act sensibly. It leaps from its place. Another compares a lover's voice to water. A third says, she is more beautiful than the goose. Which sounds questionable until you remember that in ancient Egypt the goose was a prized and pampered creature. So basically it's the 18th dynasty equivalent of, you're hotter than a Tesla. The words weren't just sentimental, they were tools, gifts, sometimes weapons. Some were clearly written as courtship efforts, like leaving a carefully phrased note on someone's doorstep in 1250 BCE. Others were more desperate, aching. There's one that simply reads, I wait at your door, I wait, I wait, I wait. You can almost hear the pacing footfalls in the sand. Historians still argue whether these writings were personal, copied from templates, or something in between. Some were probably commissioned, much like modern greeting cards. But the emotions? They feel real, sometimes painfully so. You duck into a shaded corner of the courtyard where your spouse is polishing a piece of black pottery, smoothing its edges with a wetted cloth. You ask, offhandedly, if they've ever written a love poem. They shrug. I carved your name into a tamarisk tree last week. Then, as if that weren't the most romantic thing anyone's ever said, they go back to polishing. You stare for a moment. That's actually very sweet, in a dry, resin-scented kind of way. Writing wasn't reserved only for high-class lovers either. In Deir el-Medina, the famed artisan village near the Valley of the Kings, love notes and letters between workers and their spouses have survived. Some are funny, some are passive-aggressive. One famous letter reads essentially, I sent you bread and beer. You didn't answer. Are you dead or just ignoring me? Another, written from a husband to a wife during festival season, says, I kissed the children for you and told the cat to stop sitting in your spot. Or, beyond paper, or papyrus, more accurately, love was also immortalized in tomb inscriptions. Couples requested to be buried together. In some tombs, husband and wife are depicted holding hands, sitting side by side, or embracing beneath a fig tree. One especially touching line found in a noble's tomb reads, She walked beside me in life. Let her walk beside me in death. That's the kind of inscription that makes you want to hug someone, or cry into a linen pillow. And, speaking of pillows, here's a quirky fact. Ancient Egyptian pillows were made of stone, like actual carved headrests. Apparently they believed it helped keep the head cool and protected the soul during sleep. Not very cuddly, but maybe after writing that poem comparing you to a goose, your partner didn't expect cuddling anyway. You wander into the small storage room behind your home, where old baskets and scroll fragments are tucked into nooks. On a whim, you reach for a bit of cracked pottery, the kind used for quick notes or shopping lists. You turn it over. Nothing. Blank. But wouldn't it be something to write a message? Just one? Not for your spouse, not even for the gods, for yourself. You borrow a bit of ink and a reed pen. The words come slowly. The way they carry water makes my chest feel like it is full of bees. They do not know I watch. But I do, and I am full of bees. There. Strange, personal, yours. Because in ancient Egypt, you didn't need a grand gesture to express love. You needed a surface and a moment. A piece of pottery, a stretch of bark, a wall near the river. Love was something to be witnessed, to be named, even in secret. You return to the courtyard just as your spouse looks up. What's that? Nothing, you say, tucking the pottery behind a jar of lentils. They don't press, they just hand you a bit of fruit and sit beside you, shoulder against shoulder. And somehow, that says more than 100 poems ever could. The moon tonight is a pale disk hung lazily over the rooftops, casting a milk glow on the alleyways of your little neighborhood. You're perched on the edge of your roof, legs dangling, arms resting on your knees. From here, you can hear distant singing, soft, half-drunken voices echoing off sandstone walls, someone tapping a clay jug for rhythm. Somewhere, a reed flute weaves through it all, thin as a dream. You exhale, eyelids heavy. It's a quiet night, but not silent. And in the gentle hush of it, a question keeps floating around your head. How did people flirt in a world without letters, lamps, or locked doors? Because ancient Egyptian flirtation didn't come with dating apps or candlelit cafes. There were no long walks on the beach, unless you count navigating the soggy banks of the Nile while trying to avoid crocodiles. Instead, romance here required proximity, timing, and an eye for subtlety. During festivals and feasts, flirting had its moment, but day to day, you had to get creative. You think back to earlier in the day. A young woman in the market had smiled at the potter's son while handing him a fig. He smiled back. No words. Just fig energy. That was enough. Body language meant everything. A tilt of the head, the flick of a linen shawl, a glance held a second too long. These were the signals, and of course, appearance mattered. Both men and women paid obsessive attention to grooming. Bathing was a daily ritual, sometimes multiple times a day in the heat. They exfoliated with natron, a natural salt, shaved their bodies smooth, and oiled their skin until it gleamed. Eyeliner wasn't just fashionable, it was practical. Kohl protected the eyes from glare and infection, but it also made for some devastating eye contact. Perfumes, remember, weren't just pleasant, they were signals. A man wearing a blend of frankincense and myrrh was saying, "I am both mysterious and wealthy." A woman smelling of blue lotus was saying, "Come closer." But not too close. I bite. And yes, there were literal bite marks. A love letter found in Deir el-Medina includes the phrase, "You left teeth on my shoulder, my mother asked about them," which is both romantic and a little terrifying. Still, flirting wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it was bold, especially during religious festivals, when inhibitions were lowered, wine was plentiful, and the gods were believed to welcome revelry. One of the rowdiest events was the Festival of Drunkenness held in honor of Hathor. It began with ritual intoxication and ended with music, dancing, and, well, historians still argue whether those nighttime activities were sacred rites or just very spirited mingling. You lean back and imagine it. Crowds gathered by torchlight, drums pounding, cups sloshing, bodies swaying under the gaze of the goddess of love herself. If you couldn't find someone to flirt with there, you probably weren't trying. But not every romantic opportunity came with music and moonlight. Sometimes you had to rely on gossip. Imagine this. You're a farmer's daughter. You notice the man who delivers fresh reeds every week lingers a little longer at your gate. You don't speak too scandalous, but you casually mention him to your aunt. 2 days later, a cousin happens to walk past his house. By the end of the week, everyone knows you're interested, and your father is already negotiating whether the man has enough goats. In this society, love didn't exist in a vacuum. It existed under the watchful eyes of your entire family. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had stakes. Even your neighbor's cat was judging your choices. That's why some relationships stayed quiet, too complicated to pursue openly. A surviving poem from the New Kingdom captures this secrecy. He passes me in the street. My mother watches from the window. I say nothing, but my feet follow him in dreams. You feel that one, deep in your dusty little soul. And then, of course, there were misunderstandings. Just because someone handed you a goose didn't mean they loved you. Sometimes a goose was just a goose. And yet the ancient Egyptians left behind texts and stories full of people misreading each other's signals, getting rejected, or falling in love with the wrong person entirely. One tale tells of a girl who left offerings at a shrine for weeks, asking the gods to send her a dream of her future husband. She finally dreamt of the village baker. Unfortunately, he was already married. She left town the next day. The line between divine intervention and bad luck was always fuzzy. You glance back down into the courtyard, where your spouse is asleep. An arm flopped off the side of the bed, mouth slightly open, their faces soft in the lamplight. Peaceful. Not very poetic at the moment, but real. Tangible. And maybe that's the heart of ancient Egyptian flirtation. Not the performance, but the slow unveiling of realness beneath it, the subtle understanding that beauty is fleeting, but partnership, or that might just get your soul across the western desert. One last detail worth noting, mirrors. Ancient Egyptians loved mirrors, polished bronze discs with ornate handles. They used them to check their eyeliner, sure, but also to rehearse expressions, angles, even smiles. Archaeologists have found mirrors tucked in graves with inscriptions like, "So I may always see my beloved's face." Tonight, you wonder if you've made any faces worth remembering. You settle back against the warm clay rooftop, hands folded over your belly, eyes half closed. Somewhere in the city, another flute starts to play. The notes drift up like birds, spiraling into the dark. And in your sleep, maybe you'll dream of a fig passed hand to hand, a smile in the torchlight, and the feeling of your heart fluttering like linen in the wind. The rooster doesn't even bother with a proper crow this morning. It just sort of grumbles, somewhere behind the neighbour's grain jar. You, meanwhile, are already awake, lying in that in-between space where your body's still too heavy to move, but your thoughts have marched ahead without permission. You're thinking about wives, not in a vague, philosophical sense. No, you're thinking about how a society that wrote love poems on tomb walls also had rules about multiple wives, concubines, and unofficial side arrangements, and somehow made it work. Mostly. Your own home is simple, one spouse, one sleeping mat, and a rapidly increasing number of geese. But not everyone had it so easy, because in ancient Egypt, monogamy was the norm for most people, unless you could afford otherwise. For ordinary Egyptians, artisans, farmers, scribes, taking multiple wives was rare, too expensive, too complicated, and frankly, not worth the drama. But among the upper classes, among royalty, that's where things get layered. Let's start with Pharaoh. The king of Egypt was considered a living god, a divine presence who embodied both mortal authority and cosmic order, which meant he wasn't just allowed to have multiple wives and concubines, he was expected to. The great royal wife held the highest position. She wasn't necessarily the first, or even the most beloved, but she had the title, the prestige, and the best jewelry. Her job? To produce a male heir, maintain religious rituals, and smile for limestone reliefs. Below her were secondary wives, often the daughters of nobles, foreign princesses, or carefully chosen companions. Then came concubines, who had fewer rights, but sometimes more influence, depending on their relationship with the king. A concubine who bore a son, suddenly very popular at court. Historians still argue whether these roles were rigid or flexible. Some suggest that concubine was more a matter of status than affection, that a woman could move up or down in rank based on her childbearing success, her political connections, or how good she looked in a wig. And while love could exist within these arrangements, it wasn't the point. You stretch and begin your morning routine. Rinse your face with cool water from a clay jug, rub a little oil into your arms to keep the sun from peeling your skin, then wander over to the shared courtyard well. A neighbour is already there, hauling up a heavy bucket and muttering about her husband's second wife. That's right, plural marriage wasn't reserved for kings. In some cases, wealthy men outside the royal family took on multiple wives or concubines as a sign of status. The more dependents you could feed, house and clothe, the more impressive you were. But there were rules and paperwork. Marriage contracts sometimes included clauses like, "He shall not bring another woman into the house without consent." So yes, ancient Egyptian women were legally allowed to set boundaries, and if a man violated the agreement, she could sue, or worse, talk to her mother. You think about your own arrangement, simple, clean, relatively peaceful. But what would happen if someone else moved in, a second spouse, a helper? Would you be generous and wise like a goddess of harmony, or would you quietly curse their sandals and feed them burnt lentils? Ancient stories suggest both were possible. There's a tale from the Ramesside period of a man who took a second wife after his first failed to bear children. The new wife bore twins, much to everyone's delight, but then the first wife mysteriously fell ill and all the grain in their house went bad. Coincidence or passive-aggressive magic? Even the gods weren't immune to these arrangements. Take Amun, one of the chief deities. He had Mut as his wife, but was often depicted as being close to Aset, Isis, and Hathor, depending on the temple, the dynasty, or the political climate. Divine polygamy was fluid, justified through theology, maintained through architecture. You can't help but imagine the great royal wife walking into the temple one day and seeing a new statue of Hathor next to her husband. "Oh," she'd say, "I see you made another sacred union." Cue divine silence. Back among mortals, concubines often lived within the household compound. They might manage tasks, raise children, or even serve as companions to the main wife. This created a strange blend of hierarchy and intimacy, part household, part emotional chessboard. Some families made it work beautifully, others collapsed under quiet resentment. And the children? Well, that's where things got tricky. Children from secondary wives could sometimes inherit, depending on the will, the mother's rank or the father's generosity. But more often the son of the great royal wife took precedence. This created a powder keg of jealousy, ambition, and backroom scheming. Think palace drama, but with more cats and fewer poisoned goblets. In your little courtyard, you hear laughter. A group of children are chasing each other with reed sticks. One calls the other son of the goosekeeper, which sounds insulting until you remember geese are valuable, probably meant as a compliment. Among them is a boy who might be from a blended family. He's older, more cautious, and calls two different women mother. No one bats an eye. This is just normal. Yeah, that's the thing. Love, in ancient Egypt, had room for complexity. It made space for multiple wives, political arrangements, and even affection that didn't fit tidy categories. And through it all, people found ways to connect, to share a mat, to pass bread, to whisper names in the dark. You return to your home, ducking under the linen curtain. Your spouse is rinsing lentils, humming a tune you half recognize. They glance up, give you a nod. You sit beside them, start peeling garlic. No declarations, no drama. Just this moment, shared. Because while the elite navigated the thrones and titles of love, most Egyptians, like you, built it in layers, over time, through sweat and salt and quiet loyalty. And when the sun finally slips down the far side of the palm trees, you lie beside the person you've chosen, or were given, feeling the warmth of their elbow pressed into yours. Maybe one day a scribe will carve your names together in a tomb. Or maybe you'll just be remembered by the taste of your garlic stew. Either way, it's love. You wake in the dark, long before the first bronze blush of dawn. Something pulled you out of sleep, a noise, a breeze, a dream slipping away. You lie, still, listening. And then you remember you had a dream about the afterlife. Not the one with golden fields and lotus blossoms, but something else. A dream in which your spirit was trapped, unable to cross the Nile, because someone had stopped making offerings in your name. Not out of cruelty, just forgetfulness. The realization lingers as you rise and step outside. The sand is cool underfoot. The village is quiet. Only the stars speak now. And that's when you understand the weight of betrayal in this world. not just in life, but in death. Because in ancient Egypt, heartbreak could follow you into eternity. You pour a little water into a clay bowl, habit perhaps, or superstition, and set it beside a flickering oil lamp. If someone had hurt you deeply, you might have done the same. Water to soothe your car, fire to guide it, and maybe, just maybe, a whisper to the gods, asking for justice. Because love here wasn't just about weddings and poems. It was about loyalty, memory, and what happened when those bonds were broken. Infidelity, abandonment, deceit, these weren't just personal slights. They were cosmic offenses. Violating love in Egypt meant violating Ma'at, the principle of truth and balance that governed everything from the Nile's flooding to the harmony of your own heart. If you cheated on your spouse, it wasn't just a scandal, it was a crack in the cosmic wall. And if you lied about it, well, best hope the gods weren't listening. Ancient legal records, some scrawled in the messy, stressed handwriting of village scribes, contained testimonies about affairs, secret liaisons, and suspicious absences. One man accused his neighbor of stealing the affections of his wife with charms and cheap wine. Another woman swore her husband had whispered the name of a temple singer in his sleep, which, let's be honest, would still spark an argument today. Yet, despite the seriousness, the punishments weren't always harsh. In many cases, the offended party simply left. Divorce, remember, was legal, relatively simple, and mutually accessible. Either party could initiate it, and property would be divided according to prior agreements. If a husband cheated, the wife could demand compensation. If the wife left, she could take her belongings, and sometimes her children, with her. Still, there were other consequences, social ones, whispers, isolation, a drop in market prices for your bread if the baker no longer trusted your flour. Even the cat might look at you differently. But the worst betrayal was spiritual, because Egyptians believed that the soul required offerings from the living to thrive in the afterlife. Food, incense, water, these kept the car content and healthy beyond the tomb. And who gave these offerings? Your spouse, your children, the people who loved you. So imagine being betrayed, divorced, or forgotten, and then finding yourself dead and neglected, your tomb crumbling, your spirit hungry. A terrifying fate. That's why tomb inscriptions sometimes included pleas to passers-by. Speak my name aloud, so I may live again. Even strangers could keep your spirit afloat, but it was meant to be your beloved who did it. The one who knew what kind of beer you liked and how many dates you took with your bread. To be forsaken in life was bad, but to be forsaken in death, that was eternal. And some didn't take it quietly. You've probably heard of revenant curses, those unnerving threats carved into tombs, warning grave robbers and grudge holders alike. Some were general. Cursed be the one who disturbs my bones. But others were heartbreakingly specific. Let the one who forgets my name never sleep soundly. Let their house be filled with scorpions. Let their bread taste of sand. Harsh, a little, understandable, kind of. You sit now by your door, watching the light slowly return to the east. The silence breaks with the shuffle of sandals, the cough of an old man clearing his throat. Life resumes. And yet you can't help but wonder who, in your own life, would make offerings for you. Who would leave a jug of water by your tomb? Who would still whisper your name under their breath when the festival drums faded? A sparrow hops near your feet, pecks at a grain, then flutters away. You think of those tiny moments, kindnesses, connections that outlasted betrayal, because it wasn't all curses. Some inscriptions glowed with forgiveness. One, etched into the wall of a woman's tomb, reads, "He left me in anger, but I remember his laughter. I pour wine for him still." Love didn't always survive betrayal, but sometimes it chose to remember the good anyway. And that is perhaps the most ancient thing of all. You rise, stretch, and return inside. Your spouse is stirring now, rubbing their face, mumbling about figs and missing sandals. You hand them a bowl of water. They blink, grateful. No betrayal here, not today, just two souls, alive and intact for now. The sun's well up by now, turning the walls of your courtyard a dusty gold. Your spouse is picking lint from their tunic, grumbling about an uncle who won't return borrowed baskets, and you're stirring lentils in a clay pot, watching the way the steam curls upward like incense. Ordinary, peaceful. Which is why the messenger's arrival feels like a small earthquake. He's breathless, young, holding a piece of papyrus folded with too much urgency. He hands it over, bows and bolts before you can even ask what it is. You open it slowly, expecting trouble. Instead, it's poetry. You read the first line and know instantly it wasn't written by your spouse. Someone has sent you a love letter. In this world of arranged marriages, inheritance contracts, and divine matchmaking, forbidden love still bloomed, in corners, behind reed screens, through fleeting glances and urgent scrawls on scraps of pottery. The note is short, barely more than a dozen words, but it's bold. Your voice is the Nile in flood. I cannot sleep. I burn. You feel heat rise to your face, but not from the pot. You glance around. No one is watching. You tuck the note away, and just like that you've stepped into the ancient Egyptian world of illicit affection, class-crossed desire, and secret rendezvous. Love wasn't illegal, but it was regulated, and sometimes the regulations didn't match the heart. Across Egypt's long history, from the bustling cities of the Nile Delta to the sandstone edges of Aswan, people fell for those they shouldn't. A servant for a noble, a priestess for a soldier, a widow for a young scribe. Even the gods weren't immune. Set's affair with Astarte, depending on the version of the myth, nearly caused a cosmic meltdown. Historians still argue whether these forbidden relationships were rare or just underreported. After all, scribes weren't exactly paid to record neighborhood gossip. But letters and ostraca reveal something. Whispers, protests, little explosions of emotion that don't fit inside legal scrolls. One preserved letter from a woman reads, "You said I was a bird in your palm, but you crushed me." Oof. Forbidden love came in many forms. Sometimes it was romantic love across class lines, a potter's apprentice and a merchant's daughter, for instance. Other times it was physical love without intention of marriage, which could lead to social ruin, especially for women. And then there were temple-bound lovers, priests and priestesses who had taken vows of celibacy and devotion, but still found themselves drawn to another. In Thebes, rumors of priests secretly meeting lovers behind shrines were so common, they became the subject of satirical songs. Imagine that, a love ballad mocking your nighttime escapades echoing down the street while you're just trying to buy lentils. But satire didn't stop the feelings. In one case, found in a letter preserved at Deir el-Medina, a young man writes, "I leave for my shift at the tomb, but I dream of the cloth dyer's daughter. She smells of sesame and ink." There's no resolution, just longing. As you sit quietly in the courtyard, your spouse returns from the well, dripping water from their forearms, smiling softly. You feel a pang, not guilt exactly, but ache. Because the letter in your robe pocket is a secret you haven't chosen yet, a door you haven't opened. You think back to the story of Anhai, a minor noblewoman whose tomb inscription hinted at a scandal, a love affair with a foreign envoy. Her records had been scrubbed from several places, but one note survived, written in unusually poetic language, carved into the inside lid of a jewelry box. "The stars know what we were. Let the world forget." The world does forget, but stars, maybe not. You glance up at the sky, now washed in midday blue. No stars in sight, but their silence lingers. In Egyptian belief, truth was sacred, but so was feeling. And sometimes the two collided. A woman might love outside her marriage, but remain loyal to her home. A man might harbor feelings he never acted on. A choice left unchosen could haunt a lifetime. But if you did act, sometimes it ended in tragedy, other times in poetry. There's a fable about a widow and a fisherman. She left behind a wealthy home to live in his reed hut by the river. The townspeople mocked them. Then a season of flood destroyed the widow's old estate, while the fisherman's humble home floated safely. The gods the story suggests, approved. You wonder if it's true. You wonder if love, when genuine, could ever be truly forbidden. Back in the present, your spouse is humming again, unaware. You smile faintly, say nothing. You quietly tuck the letter deeper into your robe, knowing that ancient Egypt was a place where hearts wandered, rules bent, and dreams scribbled themselves onto scraps of clay. Whether you answer the letter or not is a story for another night. For now you return to your stew, your routine, and the ever-patient sun. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones that never quite unfold. That night, the air feels different, thicker. Not just with heat, though the walls still radiate sun-baked warmth, but with something unspoken, a shift, a presence. You sit on the roof again, your back to the chimney, knees pulled in, staring at the flickering lights of neighboring homes as if they might blink back. The letter from earlier is still folded and tucked under your mat. You haven't reread it, but you've memorized the lines. You didn't reply. You didn't throw it away either. Ancient Egypt was full of stories that began this way, letters unsent, feelings unwelcome, hearts confused. But it was also full of gods. And when love became messy, dangerous, or too complicated for mortals to handle alone, that's when the deities stepped in. Because here, love wasn't just an emotion, it was a divine force, blessed, cursed, shaped, and stirred by a whole celestial soap opera of powerful beings. Start with Hathor, of course, the goddess of music, fertility, love, beauty, and joy. Her temples were filled with sweet-smelling offerings and the sound of tambourines. Devotees danced in her honor, wore her emblem, the sistrum, a sacred rattle, and believed she could bless or sour any romantic path. She was the matchmaker and the breakup coach, the patron saint of flirtation and forgiveness. But Hathor was also the eye of Ra, capable of violent fury, especially when betrayed. A love turned bitter could quickly turn dangerous under her gaze. One myth says she once had to be tricked with dyed beer to calm down after nearly destroying humanity in a fit of rage. So yes, even goddesses have bad breakups. Then there's Isis, the goddess of magic, marriage, and ultimate devotion. Her love story with Osiris was the stuff of legend. She resurrected him from death, gathered the pieces of his body scattered by his jealous brother, and conceived their son Horus in an act of love so sacred it shaped dynasties. Isis represents enduring, undying love, the kind that sacrifices everything. She wasn't just worshipped for her power, but for her loyalty. Women prayed to her for faithful husbands, men prayed to her for the strength to stay true. You wonder idly which goddess your secret letter writer might have invoked before sending that note. Not all divine influences were so tender. Set, the god of chaos and confusion, often played the villain in romantic myths. He represented jealousy, betrayal, disruption, the kind of emotions that stir when love turns toxic. Some believed if a relationship suddenly soured, it was Set's interference. Others just called it normal married life. Then there's Bes, that squat, lion-faced guardian of households. While technically a protector of children and sleep, he also warded off ill-intentioned lovers. Carvings of Bes were kept near beds, not just to stop nightmares, but to discourage wandering hands. And let's not forget Anubis, god of the dead, keeper of transitions. Some lovers carved his name into amulets when engaging in secret romances, praying he would guide them through the shadows and keep their secrets from reaching judgment. Because judgment was real here. In Egyptian belief, when you died, your heart was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and balance. If your heart was light, untainted by lies, cruelty, or betrayal, you passed peacefully into the field of reeds, their version of paradise. If not, well, Amit the Devourer would eat your heart, and your soul would vanish forever. Heavy stuff. You sip from a jug of water and stare into the night. Would loving someone you shouldn't make your heart heavy? Would thinking about them do it? Or was love, even dangerous love, still sacred in its own way? Historians still argue whether these gods were worshipped more out of fear or faith, but in matters of love it was likely both. The temple rituals reflect this. Couples would bring offerings, flowers, incense, honey cakes, and whisper prayers to statues whose eyes never blinked. They would burn letters, bury amulets, sleep with symbols beneath their beds. In one ritual, a woman might write her lover's name in red ink, a colour of power, and place it under a figurine of Hathor, asking the goddess to open his heart. Another ritual involved walking backwards around a tree while chanting, "Let him dream of me tonight." Risky, dizzying, desperate, but belief makes every gesture potent. Tonight, you find yourself tracing shapes on the rooftop with your finger, absently drawing the eye of Horus in the dust. You don't know why. Maybe you just want protection, or clarity, or to not feel like a goat in a thunderstorm. Below in the courtyard, your spouse coughs in their sleep, a soft, ordinary sound, comforting, and yet part of you is still caught in the space between loyalty and longing, because in Egypt love didn't always align with duty, and when it didn't, the gods noticed. Some punished, some protected, and some simply watched. So tonight, as you lie back against the warm clay and let the stars stitch their constellations above you, you whisper a name to the sky, not out loud, not loudly, and imagine the gods passing judgment. Would they scowl or smile? Either way, they hear you. They always do. You wake before dawn to the rhythmic thump of sandals against packed earth. Out in the street, people are already moving, priests heading to temple duties, bakers stoking fires, a pair of boys running barefoot with a hoop between them. But it's not just a normal day. Something's in the air. You can feel it in your bones. A festival is coming. Not just any festival either. This one is for Hathor, mistress of music, joy, intoxication, fertility, and of course, love. You've attended it before, watched from the edges as your neighbours got pleasantly drunk on date wine and danced until their wigs fell off. But this year it feels personal. The letter still sleeps beneath your mat. You don't touch it. You don't need to. You know its words by heart. But as you step out into the brightening courtyard and stretch your arms, you wonder whether Hathor will see it in your heart, even if no one else does. Because if there was ever a time to let love loosen its collar, the festival of drunkenness was it. Once a year, sometimes more, depending on the dynasty, cities and villages across Egypt transformed. Shrines were cleaned and decorated with garlands. The goddess's image was paraded through streets, and music poured from every doorway. It was said that on this day, Hathor's joy spilled into the mortal world, and with it, permission to let go. Vats of wine and beer were uncorked at sunrise. Priests mixed them with mandrake root or lotus, mild narcotics that blurred the edges of reality. Participants would drink until they reached a divine trance, not just celebration, revelation. You prepare your offering, figs drizzled with honey, a pinch of incense wrapped in linen, and make your way toward the local shrine. As you walk, you hear laughter, tambourines, and the deep, heartbeat pulse of framed drums. Women wear garlands of fresh flowers and perfume cones on their heads. Men weave through the crowd with baskets of bread and carafes of frothy beer. Children chase cats wearing ribbons, and someone's already passed out near the fish stall. Classic. The shrine is alive. Hathor's statue, carved of polished stone, and wearing her signature cow horns with sun disk, gleams in the morning light. People approach her with reverence and giddiness, whispering prayers through wine-thick breath. You kneel, place your offering at her feet, and lower your head. You don't say much, just one thought. Let joy find me, even if I don't know where to look. Historians still debate whether these festivals were purely religious, or more of a spiritual excuse for very public chaos. But the result was the same. For a few sacred hours, the normal rules of love, class, marriage, duty, blurred. Many of Egypt's greatest love stories began here, and probably ended here too. One poem preserved from the 18th dynasty reads, In the shadow of the goddess I touched your hand. The crowd was too loud to hear my breath, but you heard it, and you stayed. Imagine catching someone's eye in that crowd, the flicker of recognition, the silent dare. Or maybe it's not silent at all. Maybe someone pulls you into a dance, arms tangled, limbs loose, laughter erupting like a blessing. You find yourself swaying now, involuntarily, to the rhythm in the air. You're not drunk, not yet, but you feel a little dizzy, a little brave. Somewhere to your left, someone sings your name. You turn, it's them, the letter writer. They're holding a small jar of wine and wearing a garland of poppies. No words, just that look. The one that says, "This is the only moment I'm going to offer you." The music swells. You say nothing. And then the crowd surges and they vanish. Just like that. You blink, heart hammering. Did you imagine it? Possibly, probably. Hathor's festivals were known for blurred lines between dream and reality. It's part of the charm. As the day wears on, so do the effects of wine and rhythm. People sing louder, hug more often, speak more truth than usual. Some couples emerge from the festivities having rekindled old sparks. Others don't go home together. One tablet from the Ramesside period recounts a man who returned from the festival of Hathor with 2 new wives, both of whom thought they were the only one. It ended with property disputes, a 3-day fast, and a very smug scribe. But not all stories are cautionary. There's a preserved amulet shaped like a sistrum with an inscription that reads, "We danced in her name, and in the morning we stayed." Sometimes what began in revelry became something lasting. You wander home as the sky shifts to orange and the drums quiet, replaced by laughter and the clink of clay cups. People collapse in doorways, sharing bread, wiping coal-smudged eyes, clutching each other like survivors of some joyful storm. You don't know where your letter writer is. Maybe they were never there. Maybe they were always there. But tonight, you feel touched by Hathor's breath, some mixture of joy, confusion and longing that settles deep in your ribs and refuses to be named. You sit beside your spouse, who's drunk on wine and grilled leeks, snoring softly against a stack of reeds. You smile, gently, and you don't say a word, because not all love is about fireworks and proclamations. Some love is quiet survival, shared walls, whispered laughter, the knowledge that someone saved the last fig for you, and sometimes the goddess brings you exactly what you need, even if you never get to dance with it. You wake up with a garland of crushed poppies in your hair, one sandal missing, and the lingering taste of last night's honey beer still coating your tongue. Your head hums softly, not unpleasantly, just a little off-key, like someone's playing a lyre with a missing string. Next to you, your spouse is still asleep, one arm flung over their face, the other clutching an empty cup as if it were a prized offering to the gods of hangovers. The festival of Hathor is over. The streets are quieter today. Slower. Shopkeepers yawn behind their stalls. Chickens peck at dropped bits of bread. Somewhere a cat naps inside a spilled basket of dried fish, like it owns the Nile. The magic has faded, reality has shuffled back in, dragging its dusty sandals behind it. But even as the festival winds down, the political machinery of love keeps turning, especially for the royals, because when you sit on a golden throne, your heart isn't your own. You're about to enter the curious, calculating world of royal romance, where love becomes politics and kisses come with alliances, borders, and a quiet parade of backup spouses just in case the first one dies suddenly or produces only daughters. You've heard whispers of such matches, Pharaoh marrying the daughter of a Mitanni king to secure peace across the desert. Another wedding, a Hittite princess to avoid war. One union sealed over a dowry of silver, cedar wood, and a handful of exotic birds that may or may not have survived the journey. Love, in this realm, was measured not in verses but in grain, gold, and diplomacy. The great royal wife held her position not just because of beauty or affection, but because of lineage and strategic usefulness. She might be the daughter of a past pharaoh, or a cousin raised in the palace. Sometimes she was even a sister, yes, royal incest, that glorious historical plot twist we all pretend we're surprised by. Historians still argue whether such sibling marriages were truly romantic or more ceremonial, designed to reinforce divine bloodlines. Either way, they happened often enough to make the royal family tree look more like a tangled grapevine. Take Akhenaten and Nefertiti, one of Egypt's most famous couples. Their images appear side by side in countless reliefs, worshipping the sun disk Aten with gentle, almost intimate gestures. Some scholars suggest they were truly in love. Others note that they were just really good at PR, because the public image of royal love mattered. Statues of the pharaoh and his queen were placed in temples, tombs, and public courtyards. Their faces were carved in soft profiles, lips almost touching, hands held gently. "Look," these sculptures whispered. "We are divine, we are united, we are the mother and father of Egypt." Meanwhile, behind the palace doors, things were rarely that simple. Royal harems housed dozens of women, many from foreign lands, gifts from other rulers, tokens of peace, or women taken in war. These women lived in relative luxury, often with their own attendants and apartments. Some bore children. Some became favorites. Others faded into the background, their names lost to time. One surviving papyrus from the time of Ramesses II includes a list of harem residents with notes like, "Given myrrh," "Sings well," "Cursed a servant," "Removed to kitchen duty." You have to imagine the palace gossip. Did you hear Nefru is out of favour? She served sour beer to the vizier. Or that new Syrian concubine. She brought a trained parrot, a talking parrot. Even the most powerful queens couldn't afford to relax. Their status depended not just on bearing sons, but on maintaining influence, charm, and political usefulness. They had to navigate intrigues, manage rivals, and survive the ever-shifting sands of royal favour. And then there were the love letters between courts. Yes, international flirting was a thing. Letters survived between the pharaohs of Egypt and the kings of Babylonia, Mitanni and Hatti, negotiating potential marriages. These were stiff, formal exchanges with lines like, "Send my daughter jewels, and I will consider sending you my daughter in turn," which is perhaps the most ancient version of "match me and I'll match you back." Sometimes the Egyptian king would reject a foreign bride entirely, usually citing that Egyptian women are more than sufficient. A polite way of saying, "We're good, thanks." But don't mistake all of this for cold-hearted calculation. Within these arranged unions, affection sometimes grew. In letters preserved from Amenhotep III's reign, his foreign queen Taduhipa is mentioned repeatedly, her status increasing as she gained favor. Was it love? Was it diplomacy? Probably both. Because here's the strange beauty of royal romance in Egypt. Even in the middle of strategy, affection could blossom. Maybe it began with a shared joke over a poorly trained falcon. Maybe it was born from late-night conversations under polished stone ceilings, or the way one partner insisted on calling the other by their childhood name, even after they wore the crown. In the end, these love stories were written in both ink and stone. Tomb inscriptions would sometimes reveal tender details. "She was the song in my breath. I ruled the world, but she ruled me." You return home as the sun begins to lower, your head buzzing not from drink this time, but from the echoes of all these ancient entanglements. You're no royal, no harem girl, but the rules, the risks, the hopes, they're not so far off. Your spouse is in the courtyard, arranging herbs. They don't look up when you pass, but they hum a tune you recognize, something gentle, from a festival long ago. And for now, that's enough, because even in Egypt, where thrones rose and fell and hearts were traded like grain, love still found its way in. Whether it stayed, of course, was up to the gods. By the time you reach Deir el Medina, the sun is already creeping high, casting sharp shadows across the hills. The path winds between limestone cliffs and patchy desert brush, and the air is dry enough to make your skin feel like papyrus. You're not here to sightsee. You've come to this village because it holds something no palace does. Real love stories. Not the political marriages of pharaohs, not the glossy sculptures of royal couples, No, Deir el-Medina was home to the artisans, the scribes, the stonemasons who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and when they weren't busy carving eternity into rock, they were falling in and out of love just like everyone else. You pass the edge of the village, where rectangular homes of mud brick line narrow alleyways. Clothes flap lazily on lines. Chickens squawk underfoot. You hear the clink of a chisel against stone somewhere nearby. And laughter. Here things were close. Homes, people, emotions. In Deir el-Medina, privacy was a rare commodity. You couldn't have a secret crush without the entire village knowing. You couldn't argue with your spouse without the neighbour's dog getting involved. And you definitely couldn't sneak a love letter past a nosy cousin with ears like a hawk. Still, this village left behind more written material than almost any other site in ancient Egypt, including hundreds of personal notes, complaints, poems, contracts, and of course, gossip. Lots of gossip. One note discovered here reads, "I saw your husband with the brewer's daughter. He carried her basket. What man carries another woman's basket if not in love?" Good question. You duck into a shaded alley where someone has painted a faded image of Bez on the wall, protector of households, marriages, and joy. His face is grinning, but his eyes are serious, almost like he's daring you to try something stupid. This place wasn't just a hub of craftsmanship, it was a microcosm of Egyptian emotional life. People married, divorced, remarried. They adopted stepchildren, negotiated property rights, fell out with their in-laws, made up with offerings and oil. There's a surviving letter from a man named Nakht Sobek, written to his wife after an argument. "Do not cry. Your anger is a storm that fills the house. I wait by the door like a frog in rain. Come back inside." Is it sincere? Manipulative? Poetic? Maybe all three. Historians still argue whether men wrote these words themselves or dictated them to scribes, but even so, the feelings feel lived. In another home, archaeologists found a pot inscribed with, "For the one who smiles in sleep, you steal warmth from the gods." A household gift, perhaps, or the ancient version of a cheesy anniversary card. Relationships here didn't follow a single mold. Some couples lived happily, raising children, managing household accounts, like a well-oiled ox cart. Others bickered over whose turn it was to fetch water. One scribe wrote out a full inventory of a domestic dispute on the back of a work tablet, midway between a to-do list and a therapy session. "She says I never listen. I listen, I remember she said that. Also, she took the bread again." You can't help but laugh quietly, because even thousands of years ago someone was dealing with crumbs and silent treatment. But there was also tenderness. In one tomb, the walls were painted not with traditional religious scenes, but with the husband and wife simply sitting together under a tree. No divine symbols, just two people, together. And in a rare piece of stone tucked behind a home's wall, a simple message: "I love her voice more than figs," which frankly is about as Egyptian as love can get. You wander past what once was a school where young scribes practiced their hieratic script on scraps of limestone. One of those scraps contains what appears to be a teenager's attempt at flirting. "If you sit beside me at dinner, I will give you my best date. Also, I have wine." Effective, direct, respect. Later, in the corner of a small courtyard, you spot a shrine with dried petals still scattered around the base. Locals still visit here, even now, perhaps to whisper a wish, leave a prayer, or just remember someone long gone. You kneel, not out of habit, but something else. You place your hand on the stone, warm from the sun. You whisper nothing. Just let the silence fill the space. Because in this village, love wasn't carved into monuments. It was scribbled in margins, etched into daily life. It was in shared chores, borrowed sandals, the last fig saved for someone else. You rise and leave quietly, letting the sun press on your back. By the time you reach your home, the shadows have lengthened, and your spouse is folding linens with one hand while stirring stew with the other. They glance at you, not surprised, just knowing. You sit beside them. They hand you a bowl. You eat. No declarations, no drama, just this. The ordinary, precious architecture of a shared life. The house is unusually quiet this morning. No street vendors yelling about onions. No neighbour's donkey braying like it's auditioning for the role of most irritating beast in Upper Egypt. Just the soft rustle of your spouse folding linens and the rhythmic knock of a pestle against a mortar. You sit by the doorway, your feet stretched into a patch of sunlight, watching dust dance in the air. And for some reason, your mind drifts to a question you never quite asked yourself out loud. How did people in ancient Egypt get engaged? Because marriage, yes, that was everywhere. But what came before it? Was there a moment, a signal, a proposal? There were no diamond rings, no kneeling in public squares, no skywriting over the Nile. But there was a tradition, a dance between families, gifts, timing, and something involving geese. Yes, geese. It often started quietly. Two families speaking, not always the couple themselves. A father might suggest a match, a mother might approve, and once the idea took root, negotiations began. These weren't stiff boardroom meetings, they were human, messy, full of bargaining, flattery, nervous laughter, and the occasional bribe of wine or dried fish. And then there were the gifts. In place of rings, the would-be groom's family would present offerings to the bride's family, things like fine linen, oil, livestock, jewelry, or, yes, geese, fat, waddling, feathered declarations of intent. Not romantic. You try keeping a goose alive for 3 days and see how symbolic it feels. Some historians suggest that these offerings weren't technically dowries, but tokens of goodwill, demonstrating the groom's ability to provide. And while they weren't legally binding, rejecting the gift often meant rejecting the match. If accepted, a marriage contract might follow, not always, but often enough to show up in archives. These contracts could be simple or complex, written on papyrus or ostraca, depending on how wealthy or literate the couple was. And what did they say? A typical contract might include statements like, if he separates from her, he shall give her 1/3 of his property. She brings with her 2 linen robes and 1 jar of oil. He shall not bring another woman into the house. Romantic? Not exactly. But they were deeply personal and often more equitable than you'd expect. Egyptian women could own land, initiate divorce, and even enforce the terms of these contracts. A woman in Thebes once took her ex-husband to court when he failed to return her wedding dowry. She won, he paid, and she reportedly celebrated by buying a donkey. As you sit in the doorway now, you wonder what your own engagement looked like. Was there a moment, a ceremony, or did you simply wake up one day in the same house, eating from the same bowl? Your spouse joins you now, hands you a piece of bread, and sits beside you with a small sigh. No fanfare, just familiarity. That, in the end, might be the most Egyptian part of love, its quietness. The ancient Egyptians didn't rely on grand gestures. They had them, of course, painted tombs, sweet poems, garlands of blue lotus, but daily life was the real ceremony. Sharing a jar of beer, sewing a tunic together, watching for the rising floodwaters as a team, not 2 individuals. Still, not all proposals were subtle. One ostracon recovered from a workers' village contains what may be the boldest proposition in history. I will build you a home with 3 windows and a garden of onions. I will feed you till you're fat like Hathor's cows. Say yes. You have to respect the vision. There were also songs, especially among the youth. At harvest festivals, young men might sing verses across fields, calling out compliments and innuendos to potential brides. Women often sang back or ignored them pointedly, depending on their mood. One folk song fragment reads, "Come see my father's field. It is full of wheat, but I would give you the barley." Scholars still don't know what that means. Probably best to leave it that way. Engagement didn't always mean certainty either. Sometimes families agreed, only for one party to back out. In these cases, social embarrassment could follow, but rarely legal punishment. Egypt was flexible that way. You weren't doomed for changing your mind. You were just discussed, at length, in public. And then there were gods to consider. Couples often visited local temples before finalizing a union, asking for omens or divine approval. A priest might interpret the flight of birds or the pattern of spilled oil. If the signs were bad, families hesitated. If good, celebrations began. And what were those celebrations like? Not huge weddings, necessarily. Often they were household affairs with music, beer, food, and friends. The woman might move into her husband's home, bringing her belongings and a symbolic jar of grain. The neighbors would gossip. The couple would share bread. Life would begin. And what about the goose? If the bird survived to the wedding, it might be cooked for the feast. If not, it was considered an omen, not a great one. You glance now at the family next door, young couple, newly joined. She's scolding him for breaking a pot. He's trying to look sorry while chewing on a fig. You smile. Engagement in Egypt wasn't a single event. It was a slow weaving of households, expectations, and little moments. You stand, stretch, and feel the sun warm your shoulders. Then you wander into your home and reach under the mat, pulling out the letter again. Its edges are soft now. The ink slightly faded. Maybe that was your engagement too, not a ceremony, not a gift, but a note slipped across time, a small hand reaching for yours in a world where love was simple, sacred, and sometimes covered in feathers. The wind changes sometime after midday. Not a full gust, just a whisper of cool air threading through the alleyways, lifting the edges of reed mats, stirring dust into lazy spirals. You notice it while walking back from the market, arms full of lentils and the kind of cucumbers that somehow always taste like hope. You pause, turn your face into the breeze, and you realize something. You've started to love them. Not the stranger from the letter, not the almost that never became, the one already beside you. It's a quiet realization, like so many in ancient Egypt. Not lightning, not drama, just the slow accumulation of shared mornings and arguments about bread, and that one time they remembered you like your beer half warm and not too frothy. You shift your bundle of vegetables and head home, and as you do, your mind drifts to a curious question, one that's always been there, tucked behind the big ceremonies and festival songs. What did women really want? Not in the hypothetical palm reading sense, but in the practical, lived, day-to-day heartbeat of Egyptian love. Because while men wrote poems, carved statues, and made speeches, women had expectations too, and in Egypt, they were surprisingly empowered to make them known. Unlike many of their ancient neighbors, Egyptian women had legal and social standing. They could own property, inherit wealth, sign contracts, and, most shocking to some, choose their partners. A woman could say no, she could walk away, and she often did. Evidence from court records, letters, and contracts shows that women regularly initiated divorce, negotiated their own dowries, and managed household accounts. Some even ran businesses. In Deir el-Medina, there's record of a woman named Nebet, who acted as a landholder, a moneylender. And yes, she had suitors. Who wouldn't want a lover with 4 granaries? Historians still argue whether these freedoms extended to all women or mostly those of a certain class, but the documentation doesn't lie. Love in Egypt was a 2-way negotiation. So what did they ask for? Sometimes it was simple. One surviving letter reads, "He shall not drink more than his share of beer. He shall not insult my mother. He shall bring offerings on the new moon." Fair. Others asked for companionship, loyalty, protection during childbirth, a decent roof, fewer concubines if possible. In a few contracts, wives even stipulated what would happen if their husband took a second partner, penalties, property divisions, even exile from the family home. You imagine the conversations that led to those clauses. Yes, you may marry another, but I get the goats, all of them, even the mean one. Women were not passive participants in the love economy. They were architects of affection, building relationships not just on beauty or seduction, but on fairness, contribution, and shared labor. And affection. Oh, they expected that too. In love poems, women are often the speakers, describing desire in vivid language. One fragment reads, "My heart is a closed box. His voice is the key. When he speaks, the lid opens. Another is more direct, and I want to stand near him until the day becomes a shadow, and then I want to stay longer. You return home, your arms aching slightly from the weight of the basket, and see your spouse already preparing the cooking fire. They glance up, see you and say nothing, just tilt their head toward the water jar, inviting you to drink first. It's not poetry, it's not even a gesture. It's just life, shared, wordless, consistent. Maybe that's what women wanted too, not just poems written on ostraca and left anonymously in shrines, but presence, help. A partner who didn't ask for applause every time they remembered to salt the stew. In one tomb from the 20th dynasty, a woman named Tia is shown seated beside her husband, not behind, not beneath, but beside. The inscription reads, "She was my breath in the heat, my shadow in the sun, she kept the bread whole." The bread whole, not the marriage, not the lineage, not the crops. The bread, because sometimes love is just about not eating the last piece without asking. Back in your courtyard, your spouse hands you a small fig, sliced and sprinkled with something sweet. You look at them. They don't say anything. They never do, really. But you realize it's always the best fig, always given to you, and just like that, you stop thinking about letters from strangers and festivals that blur the edges and the what-ifs that never quite ask permission to become real, because this is what you want, someone who remembers, who stays, who knows your voice is a little quieter in the mornings, and who doesn't mind the way you leave your sandals by the wrong door every single day. In ancient Egypt, women didn't just want to be loved, they wanted to be seen, heard, known. And as the sun slides down the far side of the courtyard wall, you finally understand that you are. The first chill of evening brushes over your skin as you step out into the courtyard, a folded cloth draped over your shoulder and a half-empty jar of water in your hand. The sun has gone soft, leaning toward the horizon, painting everything in hues of honey and copper. You hear a donkey bray, a pot clang somewhere, and someone humming off-key 3 houses down. You pause. There's that feeling again, the strange tenderness that comes with putting a name to a partnership. Not just a name scratched into clay, but one written in the rhythms of daily life. Who rises first, who soaks the beans, who gets the biggest piece of fish without asking. And yet beneath that tenderness is a deeply Egyptian truth. Love came with paperwork. Because while emotions stirred and hearts fluttered, relationships here were also legal agreements, and often quite detailed ones. You think back to the day you moved in together. No parade, no divine chorus, just a few witnesses, a jar of oil, and the unmistakable rustle of a contract being unrolled. Marriage contracts in ancient Egypt weren't just a formality, they were a declaration of terms, of roles, of consequences. Love might be unpredictable, but the law? That was the steady heartbeat underneath it all. These contracts could be poetic or pragmatic, depending on the couple's mood and the scribe's hourly rate. A basic version might state, "He has taken her as his wife. He shall not raise his hand against her. He shall provide oil and bread daily. If he leaves her, he shall give her silver, 2 jars of beer, and 1 donkey." 1 donkey. Clearly that's where the line was drawn. Some documents included detailed inventories of what the bride brought into the union: linen robes, jars of honey, a bronze mirror, perhaps even her favorite comb. These items remained hers even after marriage. Egyptian law recognized separate property, meaning women kept ownership of their belongings unless they chose to merge them. Some contracts included terms of divorce, right there at the beginning. Imagine that, planning your exit strategy before you've even moved in. Historians still debate whether this was a cynical custom or just common sense. Probably both. One contract from the 3rd intermediate period reads, "If he insults her mother more than 3 times, she may leave without penalty." Another more generous, "If she grows ill, he shall pay for a healer. If he grows ill, she shall sit by him daily." And one particularly vivid clause, "He shall not drink beer and forget her name. He shall not give the good fish to another." Reasonable. Strict even, because in a society built on ma'at, balance, order, justice, relationships had to reflect those values too. Love might rise and fall like the Nile, but the contract ensured it didn't flood the whole house. You return to your seat, unrolling the cloth in your lap. Inside is a small tablet, limestone, smooth, blank. You were going to make a list for the week: grain, oil, new sandals. But instead you sit quietly, thinking about all the things never written down. The contract didn't mention how they always waited for you before eating, or how they picked the greenest dates because they knew you liked them just a little sour, or how they still, after all this time, asked how you slept every single morning. These aren't things you carve into stone, they're carved into routine, into trust, into the space where law ends and life begins. Not all relationships followed these neat legal patterns. Some couples never wrote a contract at all, especially among the poor. Instead, their union was recognized through cohabitation, shared work, shared meals. The community acknowledged it. The gods did too. But even without ink, expectations existed. In one letter from a woman to her estranged partner, she writes, "You may say we are not married, but I bore your child. I washed your feet. I kept your roof dry in the flood season. You owe me." No contract needed. Still, legal records could help, especially in disputes. If someone left, or strayed, or forgot who washed whose feet. In Thebes, a woman named Tashedkonsu successfully argued in court that her ex-husband owed her back payments of barley, promised in their marriage agreement. The court sided with her. He paid. She celebrated with, reportedly, a large amount of fish stew. Tonight, as you light a small oil lamp, you wonder if your own contract ever listed fish stew as an obligation. Probably not. But your spouse just handed you a bowl of it anyway, unprompted, no negotiation. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? The contract might be there to guard against failure, but real love lives in the space between the lines. In gestures, in glances, in the gentle way someone shifts their cup toward you without asking, because they know you always take the second sip. You lean back, bowl in hand, watching the flame dance. The wind has stilled. The night leans in, and somewhere, far off in the past, a couple sits under a fig tree, their names forgotten, their contract lost, but their love still echoing, soft as breath, in the stone. You dream of frogs, not majestic temple frogs or sacred amulets, just regular, grumpy little amphibians hopping around your sleeping mat, judging your life choices. When you finally wake, the sky outside is pale grey, and the air feels damp, as if the Nile is breathing on everything. You sit up slowly, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and that's when you notice it. There's a doll on your doorstep, small, carved from wax. Humanoid, but with exaggerated hips and no face. It's sitting upright, deliberately placed, as if someone wanted you to find it. And just like that, your stomach drops, because in ancient Egypt, not all love was kind, and not all magic was for good. This is a cursed doll, also known as a Heka effigy. It's part of the shadowy side of Egyptian affection, the world of jealousy, curses, and love gone wrong, where passion turns bitter and hope curdles into hexes. You pick up the doll carefully, checking for symbols or writing. Sometimes they're wrapped in red thread, sometimes pierced with bone needles. If it were a healing doll, it might be placed near an offering. But this one was meant to trouble you. Ancient Egyptians believed deeply in the power of words and symbols. The written name carried magical weight, and image-making was more than art. It was action. To sculpt a figure, speak a name over it, and bury or burn it was to intervene in someone's destiny. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread or fringe, but artifacts speak for themselves. One spell, preserved in a papyrus now tucked away in a museum, reads, "Bind her heart, that she may think only of me. Let her steps return to my door. Let her sleep be restless without my name." Another, less romantic, "Let him eat ashes. Let him see my face in every shadow and find no peace in another's arms." That's a lot. Sometimes these spells were commissioned. You'd visit a Heka priest, not a state temple priest, but a magician for hire, and explain your situation. "My lover has turned cold. She left me for the potter's son. He no longer brings me onions. The magician would then craft a ritual, maybe a doll, maybe a charm, maybe a series of words written backwards to confuse the heart. It wasn't all gloom. Love magic could also be sweet. Some carried amulets shaped like jed pillars, symbols of stability, or ankhs, symbols of life, to strengthen relationships. A mother might give her daughter a lapis lazuli scarab engraved with a blessing for a happy union. But the darker arts lingered, especially where jealousy bloomed. You've heard stories. A woman in Memphis buried a doll of her rival in a pit beneath the market, whispering prayers to Sekhmet to sour her milk and shrivel her hair. A man in Heliopolis tied red thread around a wax heart, muttering incantations under his breath until the wind turned direction. People are people. And when love didn't go their way, they reached for the only thing left: control. You return inside with the doll, uncertain what to do. Burn it? Bury it? Return it to whoever left it? Your spouse sees your face and frowns. They don't ask questions, just set down the jar they're holding and walk over. Together, you kneel in front of your little household shrine, Bess, Toweray, and a slightly chipped figurine of Hathor, and light a pinch of incense. No words, no panic, just ritual, balance. Because the proper response to dark magic isn't panic, it's ma'at, restoration of order, calm, a steady hand over trembling ground. Later, you place the doll in a clay jar, seal it with wax, and tuck it deep into the earth behind your garden wall. Not out of fear, just closure. But it lingers with you all the same, because love, even in Egypt, could bruise. There were stories of women poisoning rivals, of men casting out wives after dreams of betrayal, of charms gone wrong and spirits called that wouldn't leave. There's even a myth of a prince who fell in love with a woman he met only in a dream. He searched endlessly, invoking magic, leaving offerings. He finally found her, only to discover she was already dead. Still, he married her anyway. Love, after all, doesn't care for logistics. As the day drifts on, you feel the heaviness ease. The doll is gone, the sun returns. Your spouse makes a joke about the neighbour's goat that actually makes you laugh. And someone, possibly the same someone, leaves a single fig on your doorstep, whole, untouched, as if to say, no hard feelings. You sit down, eat the fig slowly, and let it all melt away, because in Egypt, love wasn't always gentle, but it was always taken seriously, and even if it left scars, it also left spells, songs, stories, like the one you're living now. The fig tasted fine, that's the first thing you noticed. No bitter aftertaste, no strange tingling on your tongue, just ripe sweetness, soft flesh, and the faint crunch of a single seed. So either you're not cursed, or someone's trying to apologize with produce. You're leaning toward the latter, because it's the season of festivals again, and with it comes a surge of offerings, gatherings, and rituals that blur the line between religious devotion and full-on public revelry. But today's observance is different. This one isn't about fertility or forgiveness or flooding. It's about renewal and, in a very Egyptian way, flings. That's right, festival flings. The one time a year when love took off its formal linen robe, slipped on a flower garland and said, "It's not serious, it's just the equinox." You stroll through the streets as the preparations begin. Lanterns hung between doorways, clay pots arranged in elaborate spirals. Someone's already brewing too much beer, and you hear flutes, drums, and laughter echoing through the alleys like warm water filling a basin. This is the Feast of the Beautiful Reunion, one of Hathor's many celebrations, honouring her journey from the south back to her consort Horus in the temple of Edfu. In myth, their reunion is a moment of cosmic joy, and in practice, it's an excuse for everyone to get a little wild. Couples attend together, single people come looking, and married people sometimes make complicated decisions under the full moon, because even in a culture that valued marriage, festivals offered a rare suspension of rules. During these sacred days, the gods were seen as indulgent, even forgiving. Some rites explicitly celebrated drunkenness, dancing, and intimate companionship. Historians still debate whether such encounters were truly condoned or merely tolerated. Some temples included sacred marriage rituals, symbolic unions between priests and priestesses acting on behalf of the gods. Others hint at private moments in quiet corners of the city where strangers became something else, even if only for a night. You pass a group of women painting each other's eyelids with kohl, laughing and teasing. A young man leans against a pillar nearby, pretending not to watch. There's tension in the air, not dangerous, not sharp, just possibility, the kind of electricity that makes even the sand feel like it's paying attention. You remember a story told in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina of a woman named Meretzega who met a man from the north during a festival. They shared wine, a song, and one night beneath a fig tree. He returned home the next day, and she never saw him again. But every year she lit a lamp for him during the festival, and eventually she married someone else. Romantic, bittersweet, silly, probably all three. But in Egypt, memory was sacred, even if the love itself was fleeting. And the festivals weren't just for youth. Elders participated too, offering thanks to the gods for a long life, dancing slowly in the streets, passing on songs they had learned when the Nile's banks were still lined with papyrus thickets. One elderly woman you pass is humming a tune you don't recognize. She holds the hand of a man who might be her husband, or her brother, or her long-lost sweetheart. You don't know. They'd look content either way. You stop to help a child pick up a dropped wreath, and they offer you a sliver of honeyed bread in thanks. Sweetness everywhere today, in food, in glances, in the kind of permission that only a festival can offer. Later that evening, as the sky fades to a deep copper, fires are lit and crowds gather in the open courtyard near the temple gate. Someone plays a sistrum, its sharp, metallic rattle cutting through the low hum of voices, and the crowd parts to let two dancers pass through. They move slowly, hips swaying, veils billowing behind them, arms raised in invocation. This is no stage performance, it's sacred theatre. One dancer represents Hathor, the other Horus, and as they draw closer, step by step, the entire courtyard holds its breath. Because this reunion, in myth and motion, is the moment love becomes holy again. When they touch hands, the crowd erupts, not in applause, but in sound. Sighs, ululations, the striking of tambourines, the stamping of feet. It's as if everyone's been waiting all year for permission to believe again. You stand among them, not quite clapping, not quite still. And that's when someone beside you leans close and says your name. You turn. It's not the letter writer, not a stranger, it's your spouse, their eyes warm, their fingers full of freshly plucked blue lotus. They tuck one behind your ear, say nothing. You smile, maybe tonight there will be dancing, maybe not. But the warmth in your chest tells you what matters, because while the festival celebrates new beginnings, you've quietly arrived at something ancient, something patient, something real. And when the fires die down and the songs slow, and the stars open their 1,000 golden eyes above the Nile, you'll walk home hand in hand, not because it's a reunion, but because it never ended. You don't remember falling asleep, but you remember waking up. The moonlight filters through the slats in the wall, striping your mat with soft silver. Outside, the village is quiet. No laughter now, no music, just the occasional snore from a neighbour's roof, and the soft shuffle of a cat moving somewhere unseen. You lie still, listening. Your spouse breathes steadily beside you, one hand resting just a few inches away, fingers curled slightly, palm open. You almost reach for it. Almost. Instead, your mind drifts to the future, to what comes after love, because in Egypt, love didn't end with death. It continued, it lingered. It followed you. The Egyptians didn't believe love was confined to the body. They believed in the ka, the life force, the ba, the personality, or soul that could fly between realms, and the ak, the effective spirit that emerged after death. And just as these parts of the self moved between life and afterlife, so did devotion. Tombs across the Nile are filled with carvings and inscriptions not just of gods and battles, but of couples, holding hands, exchanging offerings, gazing at each other across eternity. And these weren't generic figures, they were specific, named, recognizable. A man and his wife, again and again, painted as if they would never stop being in love, even in the field of reeds. You sit up slowly, careful not to wake your partner, and pad into the cool courtyard. The stars are out, bright, silent. Above you, the constellations the Egyptians named long ago, the bull's foreleg, the falcon, the ship, glide across the sky like patient, knowing things. You think about those tombs, about the joint burials where couples were interred side by side. Not always royalty, sometimes just craftsmen and their wives, simple people, people like you. They left instructions in their tombs. Let her rise when I rise, let her eat the bread I am given, let her name be spoken with mine. It wasn't just romantic, it was practical. The belief was that love must be maintained after death, just like in life. You had to continue providing food, drink, perfume, song, and you needed your loved ones, especially your partner, to perform the rituals, speak your name, keep your memory warm. Which is why a bad breakup in ancient Egypt wasn't just awkward, it was a potential afterlife disaster. If your spouse hated you by the time you died, would they still offer you incense? Would they still pour beer into your tomb on feast days? Or would your car go hungry forever, waiting? Some contracts even included afterlife clauses, no joke. A woman might stipulate, if he does not care for me in life, he shall not lie beside me in death. Which honestly feels like the spiritual version of changing the locks. And yet the most touching evidence of post-mortem love comes not from contracts but from letters. Yes, letters to the dead. Archaeologists have found dozens. Scratched into pottery shards, written on linen, placed in tombs. They often begin simply, "To my husband, who is in the West." The West meant the land of the dead. Beyond the Nile, beyond the sun's reach. One woman writes, "You left too soon. The fields are quiet without you. The bread is stale. Come visit my dreams." Another letter, written by a man, reads, "Our son still cries for you. I offer at your tomb. Tell me, do you still see us?" These letters weren't symbolic. They were real. People expected answers, through dreams, through signs, through the rustling of palm fronds when no wind blew. And if the deceased did not respond, sometimes the living got angry. One text includes this subtle but brutal line, "If you loved me, you would have sent a bird." Ouch. But then there are the other kinds of letters. The ones written not in grief, but in joy. A woman named Takat wrote, "I saw you in the dream. You were laughing. Your hands smelled of lotus again. I woke with tears, but they were sweet. You wonder if you'd do the same. If your partner went first, would you keep speaking to them? Would you leave offerings? Sleep near their tomb? Would you sit under the same fig tree each year and whisper, 'Still here'? And if you were the one who went first, would they keep your memory alive? Would they place your favorite cup in the grave? Would they remember that you liked your stew thick, not watery? In Egyptian love, the afterlife wasn't an ending. It was a continuation, a long, slow exhale of devotion that stretched across desert winds and star maps and the silence between dreams. You return to bed just before dawn, the sky beginning to pale. Your spouse stirs. Their hand brushes yours. You don't speak. You just stay close. And somewhere, deep in the earth or high among the stars, two lovers carved in stone are still holding hands, waiting, watching, remembering, just like you will. The sun is barely up, and already the courtyard smells like garlic and oil. Your spouse is humming again, something old and off-key, the kind of tune that's passed down through families without ever being written down. You don't ask what it is. You just let it wrap around you like morning light. There's a letter on the step. No wax seal, no perfumed ribbon, just folded papyrus wedged casually beneath the edge of a cooking jar. You open it without ceremony. And there it is, a name you shouldn't see, not the person beside you, Not someone from your past either, someone else, someone known. And suddenly you're back in the layered, smoky world of mistresses. You sit down, slowly. Let the weight of the letter settle on your lap like wet linen. Because for all the sweetness and stability of a faithful marriage, ancient Egypt made room for something less official but no less real. Unrecognized lovers. Lovers with no legal standing. Lovers who lived in the margins of contracts, in the shadows of temple walls, in the quiet hours after dusk. Mistresses. Let's be clear, the term didn't carry quite the same scandal it does today. In many households, especially wealthy or royal ones, a man could take a second woman into the home, either as a concubine or an unofficial partner. It didn't necessarily break the law, but it did shake the household. Some marriage contracts even preempted the possibility, adding clauses like, "He shall not bring another woman into the house unless she is pleasing to the wife." Diplomatic, strategic, slightly terrifying. Sometimes these other women were former servants. Sometimes they were widows, priestesses, or foreign women with no family ties in the city. And sometimes they were simply loved. Because despite every social rule, despite lineage and contracts and property, people fell hard, unexpectedly, messily. Historians still argue whether these women were seen as threats or simply realities. Some were treated well, given gifts, rooms, even children whose names appeared in official records. Others were hidden, kept quiet, folded into silence like scraps in an unused scroll. There's a famous letter written by a woman to her lover after he took a second partner. "You said the stars were only mine. Now they shine over 2 doorways. Are you a god, then, with 2 skies?" Oof. But not all mistresses were tragic. Some wielded real influence. A woman named Renutet, believed to be the favorite of a high-ranking scribe, shows up in multiple household inventories. Her name appears beside fine oil, linen, jewelry. In one document, the scribe even refers to her as "she who sweetens my waking." Not exactly subtle, the wife, nowhere mentioned. And yet in another tomb painting, the same man is shown beside his legal wife, smiling, formal, proper. 2 loves, 2 worlds. You look up from the letter in your lap, suddenly aware of the breeze shifting through the palm fronds above the courtyard wall. The leaves whisper. You think of secrets, of names never spoken aloud. In ancient Egypt, a mistress might never be acknowledged in life, but she could still appear in a dream, a ghost, a smell on a tunic, a memory pressed into the back of the mind like a wax seal. There's even a superstition in some older texts that says, if a man lies with 2 women, one will linger in his tomb. What that meant exactly, no one's sure. Maybe it was a warning, maybe it was a promise. Some concubines became wives, especially if the first wife died or left. Others bore sons who later challenged their half-brothers for inheritance. Dynasties rose and crumbled because of such unions. Even the great Amenhotep III had multiple consorts whose children shaped the politics of the empire. But in the common households where you live, things were less ceremonial, more human. There's the sting of betrayal, the awkward tension at festivals, the moments when someone doesn't come home right away, the way a favorite bowl gets broken and no one confesses, the way silence becomes a language. You glance across the courtyard. Your spouse is still humming, now gently, pounding dough into shape. They haven't seen the letter. Maybe they won't. Maybe you'll burn it. Maybe you'll read it again later. Maybe you'll write back. Love in Egypt was never just one thing. It was legal and spiritual, sensual and strategic. It could be a dance or a war, a contract or a poem, a dream or a scar. And mistresses, they were part of it, part of the mess, part of the memory, part of the math. You fold the letter, place it beneath your bowl of lentils and stand, because life keeps moving, bread keeps rising. And the gods, they see everything, even the second names. Today begins with silence. No festival drums, no gossip bouncing between rooftops, no letters on the doorstep. Just the soft rustle of linen being hung to dry and the far-off bleat of a goat with opinions. The air feels still. Not heavy, just paused. And perhaps that's fitting, because today your thoughts turn to the ones who never married at all, the bachelors and spinsters of ancient Egypt. They existed, of course. Not everyone was paired. Not everyone followed the path of proposals, contracts and children carefully counted on scrolls. Some people, by choice or by chance, stayed single. And contrary to what you might assume, the world didn't end for them. You sip from your morning cup, a thin barley brew with just enough sweetness to keep it from tasting like a mistake, and settle into a sun-warmed corner of the courtyard. Birds chirp overhead, a neighbour shuffles past with an empty jug, and you wonder, what would life look like without a partner? In ancient Egypt, marriage was common, but it wasn't always compulsory. There's no law on the books that demands a person must wed. There's no universal condemnation in surviving texts. In fact, some individuals, especially priests, scribes and craftswomen, thrived on their own. Take Tanefere, a priestess of Hathor whose letters remain intact centuries later. She lived alone, managed her property, and referred to herself as beloved of the goddess. No mention of a husband, no hint of shame, just rituals, independence, and a very detailed inventory of perfume jars. Or Bakit, a female scribe, rare in any time, who left behind a will dividing her goods among nieces and nephews, not children or a spouse. Her name appears in temple records, carved confidently in her own hand. Historians still debate whether these women were exceptions or simply unremarked upon, part of a quiet stream of solitary lives that left few ripples in official records. And the men, they pop up too. One letter preserved from Deir el-Medina mentions a man called Horemheb, who has no wife, no children, but always brings fish to the workers. Was he lonely, or just very into fishing? Either way, he was accepted, known, part of the community, because in Egypt, value wasn't tied only to marriage. It was tied to what you did, what you built, who remembered you, how well you honored the gods, maintained ma'at, and contributed to the world around you. That's not to say it was always easy. Single people, especially women, often lived with extended family. A sister's house, a cousin's courtyard. Independence was respected, but resources were still pooled. Space was shared, and the occasional nosy aunt might still ask why you hadn't settled down yet. Some tried. Love letters exist that end in heartbreak. She would not come. I brought wine. Her brother sent me away. Others never bothered. A famous poem written by an anonymous bachelor includes the line, "A wife is a roof, but I like the sky." And another found on the wall of a storage room, "Too many pots, too many opinions. My home is quiet. My fish are well fed." Not exactly Shakespeare, but you get the point. Still, singlehood came with risks, especially later in life. Without a spouse or children, who would make your offerings when you died? Who would say your name aloud during the festival of the valley? Who would keep your car from withering? This fear shows up in inscriptions, people requesting temple caretakers, friends, even paid strangers to speak their name in case family didn't exist. One tomb reads, "Let anyone who walks past say, 'May Bakra eat bread in the west, and I shall bless them.'" Practical, hopeful, a little sad. But perhaps the most fascinating part of single life in Egypt is how flexible it was. Some people stayed single forever. Others didn't marry until later. Some had lovers, companions, undefined relationships. Some women bore children and raised them alone. Some men left inheritances to neighbors instead of kin. Egypt didn't demand a singular path. Instead, it asked, are you living with honor? Are you keeping your oaths? Are you adding sweetness to the world, or sourness? Marriage was one way, but it wasn't the only way. You glance around your courtyard now, watching the linen flap gently in the breeze. Your spouse is out visiting a cousin. The house is quiet, peaceful, and you think, if you'd never married, would you miss this? Maybe. Or maybe you'd still be here, sipping barley brew, humming half-songs to the breeze, leaving offerings to the gods in the same bowl every morning, still part of the great rhythm, still yourself, still enough. In Egypt, love could be partnership, but solitude could be sacred too. You rise early, before even the temple birds begin to trill. The village is suspended in that pale, blue-grey hour where nothing moves, not carts, not cats, not even gossip. Because today is the day of judgment, not for you, thankfully, not yet. But a neighbour's father has passed on, and the household is preparing the rites. You've been asked to help carry linens and fetch a bit of resin from the apothecary. Small tasks, but sacred all the same. And as you walk, you think about what love looks like when someone dies. Not the poetic version, not lotus petals on a tomb, or lovers whispering through dreams, but the logistics of it, the rituals, the mourning, the grief baked into structure. Because in ancient Egypt, love didn't get to collapse into chaos. It was expected to behave, to proceed. You arrive at the house and are greeted with hushed nods. The women are already chanting, weaving garlands, scrubbing amphorae. The men stand awkwardly near the doorway discussing arrangements while pretending not to cry. There is a table set aside covered with jars, honey, unguents, natron, beer. You help set a pot of barley stew beside the rest, and it occurs to you this is a love language too, feeding the dead, literally and symbolically, because in Egyptian thought the dead were not gone, they were simply elsewhere, and they still needed you, still needed care, still needed love. And so began the process of preparing a body not only for burial but for judgment. That judgment in the Hall of Two Truths was no joke. A heart was weighed against a feather, too heavy with wrongdoing, and it was devoured by Amit, the part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus goddess you definitely don't want to meet. Too light, and the gods might wonder what you left undone. This was the moment when love had to speak on your behalf, literally. In many tombs, spouses would compose spells and declarations, calling upon the gods to recognize their beloved as kind, generous, faithful. Sometimes these were written by hand, sometimes carved into stone, sometimes whispered at the edge of the tomb, carried away on incense smoke. One wife writes, "My husband was never cruel to animals. He paid the workers on time. He honored the goddess and kissed our children. Let him pass." Another, simpler, "He never lied, except about wine, but only a little." You can't help but smile at that, because love didn't have to be grand, it just had to be real. During the mourning period, spouses and children wore rough linens, let their hair go unbraided, and walked barefoot. This wasn't for show, it was meant to strip the soul bare, to match the loss outside with a posture of humility. You step into the small courtyard, where the body lies wrapped and still. A priest murmurs a spell over the mouth, the opening of the mouth, a rite that symbolically gives the dead the ability to breathe, speak, and defend themselves in the afterlife. You glance at the widow. Her face is streaked with ash and tears. Her fingers still tremble as she touches the linen shroud. And yet, in her other hand, she holds a small carving, a tiny falcon, perhaps Horus, perhaps just a keepsake. She places it gently on the chest of her husband and whispers something only he can hear. No one asks what it is, because that's private. That's love. Historians still argue how much of this was belief versus ritual versus cultural pressure. But the result is the same. Love became a bridge between worlds. If it was strong enough, remembered enough, spoken often enough, it might even guide a soul safely across the perilous deserts of the afterlife. Even now, in some tombs, archaeologists find graffiti, not damage, but messages left centuries later. We still remember you. Your house is gone, but your name is not. The Nile still floods. As if strangers took it upon themselves to continue a love story no one else could finish. You help carry the body toward the edge of the necropolis, the procession slow and humming with prayers. Children sprinkle flowers. The priest begins the chant. And just before the tomb is sealed, the widow steps forward once more, touches the lintel, and says, "You will not be alone." You believe her. Because if love could follow someone into judgment, into sand, into silence, then maybe, just maybe, it can never truly die. Not here, not in Egypt, not in you. The sun is high now and the village breathes again. The funeral is behind you. The courtyard is quiet. You sit with a bowl of dates, soft and sticky, and the sound of bees droning in the reeds is the only thing urging time forward. It feels like you've been moving through something sacred, something heavy but invisible, like walking underwater. And now? Now you think about the people who didn't just love in Egypt. They loved Egypt itself. Because, yes, while plenty of lovers turned their eyes toward one another, whispering promises and scribbling names on linen and stone, others gave their love to the land, the Nile, the cities, the gods, the duties, and in some cases, to pharaohs. You've heard the stories, no doubt, about queens who married gods, about priests who remained celibate so their affection could be wholly devoted to the divine. But the line between political loyalty, spiritual passion, and genuine affection was blurred and shimmering, like sunlight on the river. Take the women of the royal court. Their relationships weren't just romantic, they were diplomatic, ceremonial, and sometimes symbolic unions with divinity. Pharaohs were considered gods on earth, literally. To lie with one wasn't just marriage, it was a form of worship, which, let's be honest, probably made arguments over whose turn it was to light the lamp feel a little lopsided. One woman, Kia, sometimes referred to as a lesser wife of Akhenaten, vanished mysteriously from the records. Her name was chiseled out, her images removed. Was she a rival to Nefertiti, a political inconvenience, or something else entirely? Historians still argue whether she was punished for love or for stepping outside her ceremonial role. Then there's the case of Meretamun, daughter and wife to Ramses II. Yes, you heard that right. It's unclear how literal their marriage was, but the records describe her with every title of affection and honor, standing beside him in statues, forever young, forever adoring. Creepy? A little. But in Egyptian iconography, such unions symbolized harmony, continuity, and the merging of divine bloodlines. It's important to remember that Egyptian love wasn't always warm or mutual in the way we think about it today. It could be hierarchical, ritualistic, and part of a system that valued symbolism over sincerity. That said, there's also evidence that some people really, truly did fall in love with Egypt itself. Scribes write poems to the Nile. You flood, and the earth opens her mouth. You recede, and she sighs. Farmers sing to their fields. Soldiers carve prayers to the wind on their shields. One particularly touching fragment, likely written by a woman, reads, I love my home, the smell of hot stones, the way the ibis walks, the roof at noon. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine it full of grand palace romances and secret assignations beneath temple eaves. But sometimes love was as simple as this, a familiarity with your own village, your daily rhythm, your corner of the world. You stretch out on the bench now, belly full, arms behind your head. Above you, a hawk circles, maybe Horus, maybe just a hungry bird. Either way, it draws your mind upward, toward the gods again, because many Egyptians gave their love not to people, but to divine beings. The goddess Hathor, for example, wasn't just a deity of music and beauty. She was a figure of passionate love. Young women prayed to her for affection, for fertility, for tenderness. Some even wore amulets in her shape, hoping to sweeten the heart of someone they admired. There's a record of one girl who whispered a prayer to Hathor every morning while grinding wheat. Let him notice the braid I wear. Let him speak kindly at the well. Let me not trip when I pass his doorway. You can't help but laugh. Some things never change. Men, too, made offerings to Isis, to Bastet, to Sekhmet, depending on whether they wanted protection, affection, or something slightly more adventurous. But what's remarkable is how accessible the gods were. You didn't need a temple to speak to them. You could murmur to a statue, scrawl a wish on a pot, even whisper into the wind if that's all you had. Egypt was alive with unseen ears. Love could flow upward just as easily as it flowed sideways. And that It is strangely comforting, because even if no one else knew your name, even if your affections weren't returned or your partner had vanished into the west, you could still love. You could still pour it somewhere, into prayer, into land, into memory, into meaning. The Nile always answered eventually, and so you lie back, watching the sky turn amber, and wonder what you've given your heart to. Not just who, but what. A house, a path, a story, a god, a breeze, a moment. In Egypt, that counted too. Evening settles over the village like a linen veil, soft and thin, barely noticeable until you realize you're blinking more often, straining to see where the sunlight used to land. The air carries the scent of wood smoke and something roasted. Goat, probably, though it could just as easily be duck if the butcher was feeling generous. You pause at the doorway of your house, hand on the frame, and hear laughter across the street. Young laughter, playful, teasing, half-whispered. Two figures, barely more than shadows now, slip behind a wall. A giggle escapes, then silence. Ah, teenage love, the reckless kind, the kind with no plan, no dowry, no signature, just impulse and sandals dusted in sand. In ancient Egypt, love didn't wait until adulthood, or tax records, or formal introductions. It bloomed in courtyards, behind reed fences, in the back corners of papyrus groves. And it was a problem for parents, for priests, for anyone trying to keep things orderly. Young people, then as now, had a habit of finding one another, too early, too often, and too dramatically. There are entire instructional texts meant to guide teenage boys on how to behave, most of which boil down to, calm down, seriously, calm down. One hilarious line from a papyrus scroll reads, do not chase every skirt like a hungry dog, the gods see, and so do your uncles. Solid advice. Girls, on the other hand, were warned not to sneak out during festivals, not to wear too much coal, and definitely not to talk to musicians, which, let's face it, only made all three sound more appealing. There's even a surviving letter from a father to his daughter. He is not worthy of you. He has no goats. He lies about fish. And a response, written in the same hand. Scholars assume she forged it. You do not know his soul or his shoulders. Shoulders, you chuckle. Some things are eternal. Despite the rules, youthful romances blossomed, secret notes passed, eyes met across the market. Anklets were given, plucked flowers exchanged. In villages where everyone knew everyone's business, it was impossible to keep a secret. And yet somehow, everyone tried. Historians still argue whether premarital relationships were truly forbidden or just discouraged. Texts are inconsistent. Some moral writings frown upon it, while love poetry from the same period paints a much more passionate and frankly steamy picture. One scribe wrote, she walks past and I forget the names of gods. My scroll falls from my hand. I am undone. That's not just infatuation. That's a boy who's failing scribal school. There are even love spells targeted at young hearts. Tiny scraps of papyrus where someone scrawled a name and bound it to a wish. May she dream of me. May her feet walk toward my door. May her mother be distracted. You admire the ambition. But let's not forget the risk. For girls especially, reputation mattered deeply. A whisper could seal a fate. Too many glances and a marriage proposal might vanish like dew on a lotus leaf. Some families responded by arranging early marriages, better safe than scandalous. Others tightened supervision. A few simply sighed and hoped for the best. Meanwhile, young lovers carved their initials into fig trees, found excuses to fetch water at the same time, and dared to hold hands on the path home from temple. You remember, don't you? That feeling of standing too close, of brushing fingers, of wondering if the other person's heart was thudding as hard as yours. That didn't start in the 20th century. That's been around since sandals were invented. One poem, undated but likely written by someone in their teens, reads, "The world is too hot, the river too slow. I cannot eat figs. I have seen his face." Tragic, beautiful, slightly overdramatic, perfect. You turn from the door now, stepping inside as a breeze pushes past your ankles like a curious spirit. The fire is low, the air smells of thyme and toasted grain. Somewhere, a reed flute begins to play, soft and aimless, the kind of tune you hum without knowing it. And you think of those young ones outside, still hiding behind the wall. Will they marry? Will they remember each other in 20 years? Will one of them be brave enough to write a name in the sand? In Egypt, love had rules, but rules bend. Hearts don't. The music fades. Not because the flute has stopped, but because your mind is elsewhere now, drifting, as it so often does, down the winding corridors of memory and speculation. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The stars are beginning to gather, shy at first, then bolder. You lean against the doorway and think, what about the unwritten love stories? Not the loud ones, not the celebrated royal marriages, not the tragedies carved into tombs, not the flirty poems tucked into linen sleeves. No, you're thinking of the in-between loves, the secret ones, the quiet ones, the forbidden ones. In a society that loved order, ma'at, the sacred balance, anything outside of the expected could rattle the whole system. And yet, human hearts are not known for asking permission. Take, for example, same-sex love. Egyptologists have debated this for decades, and they still haven't agreed. There are hints, whispers, and ambiguous records. But direct proof? It's rare, often erased, often reinterpreted, through cautious academic phrasing. Still, one case shines like a flickering oil lamp, the tomb of Nyankhnum and Khnumhotep. Two men, two high-ranking officials, buried together in a beautifully adorned tomb from the 5th dynasty. They are shown nose to nose, which in Egyptian art is equivalent to kissing. Their arms are around each other. Their families are present, yes, but they are front and center, sharing the intimate poses usually reserved for husband and wife. Some scholars insist they were brothers. Others aren't so sure. Because if you look closely, if you read between the hieroglyphs, if you imagine what couldn't be said out loud, you begin to wonder. Could love even then find a way where society said no? And what about other forms of love that didn't fit the mold? Widows who never remarried, even when offered the chance. Men who took lovers from other classes, a potter falling for a noble's daughter, say, or a servant daring to write a love spell with the name of a scribe's son. Cross-cultural couples too, Egyptians marrying foreigners. These unions were usually treated with suspicion, sometimes outright rejection. Foreign wives might not be allowed to inherit. Their gods might not be welcome in the house shrine. But still, some did it anyway. There are letters preserved in the Amarna archives, written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the day, where foreign princesses asked to marry Egyptian kings. Some of these marriages were political, yes, but affection sometimes followed. One princess writes, "I am learning your language, I eat your bread, I miss my mother, but your eyes are kind." Oof, that's enough to make you clutch your chest and stare into the fire. There were other forms of love that didn't translate neatly into today's categories. For instance, the intense emotional bonds between servants and their masters, especially when the line blurred. One inscription from a tomb built by a wealthy woman reads, "To my steward, Senefer, who made my days light and my evenings full of song, may we walk beside the Nile again in the field of reeds." Is that affection, loyalty, something more? Historians still argue, because ancient Egyptians didn't always write about love the way we do now. They used metaphor, they used imagery, they let lotus flowers and perfume jars do the talking, they let silence say what couldn't be carved, and sometimes love wasn't romantic at all. It was devotion to a child, to a friend, to a cause, to a god. There's a letter from a midwife to her former patient. "I remember your son's first cry. I see him now at the market. He walks like you. I smile and feel full." Or from a scribe to his colleague, "Without your ink, my work is hollow. Without your jokes, my mornings are too long. You can't read those and not feel something, even now, even across millennia." You return inside, sit beside the dwindling fire, and stare at the flicker of shadow against stone. You think of all the unnamed, uncarved, uncelebrated loves, the ones that didn't make it into the scrolls. The ones whispered but never recorded. The ones that ended at the city gate, at the temple wall, at the parents' disapproving look. But they were real, you know they were, because the heart doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't check census forms, it just reaches. And sometimes reaching is enough. Tonight the moon is low and lazy, dangling just above the palm trees like it couldn't be bothered to climb higher. You step outside again, barefoot now, letting the cool grit of sand press into your soles. The wind carries the faintest hum of bullfrogs and distant drums. Another wedding, that's the third one this month. You smile at the thought, because while ancient Egyptian love had rules and rituals and papyrus scrolls filled with warnings, it also had parties, big ones, loud ones, the kind with too much wine, questionable dancing, and probably at least one cousin who regrets everything by morning. Let's talk about weddings. They weren't like today's. There was no formal religious ceremony, no priests, no temple vows, no giant cake shaped like the Sphinx. In fact, there wasn't always a ceremony at all. Marriage in ancient Egypt was often as simple as two people agreeing to live together. That was it. Sometimes there was a written contract, sometimes just a handshake, sometimes a basket of figs and a wink. What mattered was that both parties and their families understood the arrangement. The phrase used was beautifully simple. She has made a house for him. And just like that, they were married. Of course, that doesn't mean it was all sunshine and lotus petals. There were negotiations. Who would bring what into the household? How much would the dowry be? What about property? Children? Who keeps the goat if things go sour? The good news? Egyptian women had legal rights in marriage, more than in many later societies. They could own property, divorce, sue their husbands, and keep their inheritance. If a marriage ended, a woman didn't have to run back to her father's house with nothing but a linen tunic and her favorite amulet. She could walk away with her share. There's a surviving marriage contract from around 600 BCE that reads like a prenup drafted by a very tired lawyer. If he divorces her, he shall give her 1.2 gold daben, plus a tunic, plus oil, plus her original basket. The basket, always the basket. Historians still argue whether most marriages were love matches or arranged. The truth? Probably both. Love was often a happy accident, but a strategic marriage could mean financial security, land alliances, and fewer uncles showing up uninvited. That said, love poems hint at plenty of romance before the agreement was sealed. One young woman writes, "I am his without papers. My heart dances like fish in the canal. My mother pretends not to see." Sneaky and sweet. Weddings themselves were community events, less about ceremony, more about celebration. Neighbors gathered, musicians played, beer flowed, brides wore flower crowns, their eyes rimmed in kohl and their feet stained with henna. Grooms tried to act cool and mostly failed. You imagine one such scene now. A courtyard lit with oil lamps, laughter, drums, a toddler eating honey with both hands, an old woman dancing like no one asked her to, but everyone's glad she did. The couple sits beneath a woven canopy while relatives offer gifts, bread, jars of oil, maybe a goose, if things are fancy. There's a short blessing, something about fertility and peaceful sleep, and then the feast. Roasted meats, lentils, dates soaked in wine. Someone recites a poem. Your voice is sweeter than harp strings. Your walk is smoother than river clay. I see no one but you, except the cook, and only because he brought cheese. It's possible that's a joke. It's also possible Egyptians really loved cheese. Later, the couple would return to their new home, a shared space filled with amulets and linens and the faint smell of sandalwood. There might be awkwardness, there might be joy, there might be a cat who absolutely refuses to sleep anywhere but on the husband's face. But the foundation has been laid. They have made a house together. And in Egypt, that was everything. You glance back at your own doorway now. The shadows have deepened. The frogs are louder. Across the village, the drums of that wedding still echo faintly like a heartbeat just under the sand. You wonder how long those two will last. 5 years? 50? Maybe just the night? But then again, maybe love isn't measured by how long it lasts. Maybe it's measured by how deeply it's felt, how earnestly it's begun, how loudly it's celebrated, how fondly it's remembered. And in ancient Egypt, that kind of love was always worth dancing for. The drums have gone quiet. Only the frogs remain now, chanting their sleepy chorus along the canal, their croaks mingling with the whisper of reeds swaying in the warm night breeze. You stretch out under the stars, belly full, mind meandering. You've walked through the flirtations, the feasts, the formalities. But love, as you've noticed, doesn't end with marriage. No, in Egypt, the story continued into the everyday, into routine, into aging together, into disputes over laundry, and whose turn it was to patch the sandals. So let's talk about domestic love, the long-haul kind, the kind that lingers over morning bread and pauses to swap flies away from each other's soup, the kind that doesn't always get written in poetry, but sticks around anyway. In ancient Egyptian homes, daily life was busy but balanced. Husbands often worked in trades, farming, craftsmanship, temple work, or military service. Wives managed the home, oversaw children, baked, brewed beer, and spun linen. But this wasn't a strict hierarchy, there was fluidity. A wife might run a shop, a husband might help grind grain. Some couples worked side by side, like the potter and his wife painting vessels together, bickering gently over how many ibises is too many ibises on one bowl. One surviving ostrakon, a pottery shard used like scrap paper, shows a drawing of a man offering his wife a flower while she stirs a pot. She's frowning, but she accepts it. The caption reads, "He was late." Again, the stew was not. That might be the first recorded apology flower in human history. Love was practical in Egypt. It wasn't all lotus blossoms and perfume. It was waking early to sweep the courtyard. It was arguing over grain rations. It was staying when things went quiet. And when the silence stretched too long, there were remedies. Ancient love spells weren't just for attraction. Some were for reconciliation. One papyrus contains a chant to soften the heart of the beloved when anger has come between them. The spell involves honey, a carved wax figure, and repeating the phrase, "Let her speak kindly again, let her lips forget sharpness." You imagine some scribe whispering that over and over, pacing the hallway, clutching a tiny wax figurine and a big dose of hope. There's something touching about that. Not fireworks, not passion, just the desire for kindness to return. And yes, there were bumps along the Nile. Marital conflict was not uncommon and divorce was not taboo. A couple could simply decide it wasn't working. No scarlet letters, no shunning, just a division of property, a few official witnesses, and a polite return to one's family home. Though sometimes less polite. One document records a woman returning her husband's tunic and amulets with a note. "May you find a wife who appreciates how loudly you chew." Ouch. But for every ending, there were countless quiet continuings. Couples who lived into their grey years together, who raised children and prepared burial goods, who, when the time came, were laid to rest side by side, hands carved inches apart, eternally reaching. The tombs of middle-class couples are full of touching inscriptions. One reads, "He poured the beer. I baked the bread. We were full. We laughed. We lived." Not exactly Shakespeare. But maybe that's better. Egyptian love, in its quiet phase, was less about poetic grand gestures and more about presence. Sitting together at the end of the day, brushing lice from each other's hair, refilling the oil lamp without being asked. One can imagine them watching their grandchildren play, exchanging small glances that say, "We did all right." You return indoors now. Your own lamp flickers low. The walls glow golden and warm. You set down your thoughts like clay jars, one beside the other, labelled and sealed, then pause. There is one last type of love worth visiting before you sleep, the love that outlives the body, because in Egypt, death was not the end of love. Quite the opposite. It was only the next chapter. The fire's almost out now, just a soft, orange breath in the clay brazier. The room is quiet, your limbs are heavy, But your mind drifts further still, not toward endings but toward the after. Because as you've seen again and again, ancient Egyptian love didn't stop at the grave. It persisted in memory, in ritual, in stone. So tonight, before we close, let's walk together down the final flower-strewn path. Let's talk about love beyond death. You rise again, just in your thoughts this time, and walk along the edge of a necropolis, that city of the dead. Stone tombs nestle close like sleeping homes. Some are grand, guarded by sphinxes and inscribed with hymns. Others are simple, just painted bricks and a few carved prayers. And inside, couples, reunited. Many tombs were built for two, the man and the woman side by side in eternity. On the walls they are painted walking hand in hand beneath the sycamore tree of Nut, sharing figs, listening to music, still young, still in love. It wasn't metaphor. They expected to live again, together, in the field of reeds, their version of paradise. A mirror of Egypt, but without death, taxes, or unreliable flood seasons. And no in-laws, one assumes. To get there, though, you had to be remembered. You had to be named, spoken of, prayed for, which is why love letters to the dead were so important. Yes, real ones. There are dozens that have survived the sand and time, written on papyrus, ostraca, even linen wrappings, left in tombs or read aloud during rituals. One of the most famous is from a grieving widow to her husband. "Come to me in my dreams. Let me see your face once more. I have baked the bread you liked. The dog still waits at the door." Another, written by a husband to his departed wife, reads, "They tell me to remarry. I do not listen. You are not gone. You are in the song of the birds and the shade of the fig tree. You close your eyes for a moment. You can hear that bird song. You can see the fig tree. You can feel that kind of love, the kind that holds on. It wasn't just grief, it was connection. The dead were still part of life. They received offerings. They were told news. Children were named after them. Even in bustling cities like Thebes or Memphis, families made pilgrimages to family tombs, leaving bits of food, letters, or even jokes. Yes, jokes. One inscription reads, "My wife, if you are watching, I did not burn the lentils. The cat did. Please haunt the cat." Incredible. Historians still argue how literally the Egyptians believed in these after-death interactions. Were they symbolic? Were they heartfelt? Were they both? You know the answer doesn't matter. What matters is that they felt it. They loved deeply enough to speak to silence, to write into the void, to believe that hearts might still hear across eternity. Even funeral texts, those solemn spells written to guide the dead, are filled with love. One says, "May she walk with perfume in her hair, may he wear clean linen forever, may they meet each morning with joy." And that idea that you could be joyful together forever is quietly astonishing. You step away from the necropolis now, thoughts lingering in the sandstone stillness. Love had rules in Egypt, boundaries, contracts, rituals, spells. But in the end, none of it could contain the true shape of the feeling. It flowed from flirtation to marriage to old age to beyond the grave. And through it all, it was deeply human. You've seen it now. The teenage longing scribbled in ink, the poems that throb with quiet ache, the wives who whispered prayers at dawn, the husbands who still baked her favorite bread, and you, here in this quiet night, heart soft, head heavy, have carried it all with you. Not just history, but a memory. By now the village sleeps, the frogs have fallen silent, even the breeze has hushed, slipping off somewhere to nap beside the date palms. The fire is no more than a pale glow, just enough to catch the glint of a scarab amulet on your table, forgotten there like a leftover blessing. You lie down, not in a royal tomb or a painted bed of cedar, but on your own modest mat, surrounded by linen, dreams, and the soft, crumbling echoes of love stories long faded from stone. And yet still here, still breathing beneath the dust, because in ancient Egypt love wasn't just a feeling, it was an anchor, a compass, a ritual, a refuge, and yes, a risk, one that people took again and again despite curses, contracts, gossiping aunts, and the occasional misfired love spell involving crocodile fat and garlic. They did it anyway. They They loved anyway, even when it was inconvenient, even when it hurt, even when it lasted beyond life. You've walked alongside them now across painted tomb walls, papyrus poems, and market stalls buzzing with hope. You've peeked into wedding feasts, whispered prayers, bedroom arguments, and fig tree daydreams. You've met the hearts that beat beneath the gold, the joy, the jealousy, the longing, the quiet comfort of two people who've folded 1,000 ordinary days into something sacred, and through it all you've seen what they saw. That love, whether offered to a god, a spouse, a child, or a memory, was never wasted. Not if it was sincere, not if it left even one papyrus scrap behind saying, "You made me smile." And now, as your own eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift soft and strange, you carry with you a little of that warmth, the kind that glows even in silence, the kind that might just last longer than stone. And now, breathe out. Let your shoulders sink a little deeper into the bedding. Let your hands unclench, your jaw soften, and your thoughts slow to a gentle, meandering crawl. You're not standing in a sun-scorched field anymore. You're not brushing sand off your sandals or squinting at hieroglyphs in a flickering tomb. You're right here, safe, still, and slowly fading into that peculiar, wonderful in-between space where dreams begin. Tonight, the hearts of ancient lovers are tucked into your memory like pressed lotus petals. Their voices, some laughing, some longing, whisper just beneath your breath, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind you, someone once loved like you do. Someone made bread with their hands and sang lullabies and wrote awkward poems they were too shy to read aloud. Someone danced at weddings and cried by graves and hoped, deeply, stubbornly, that love might outlast everything else. That hope somehow reached you, so let it rest with you now. Let it wrap around your ribcage, soft and golden, like linen in the afterlife. Let it warm you in the quiet. Because even boring history, especially boring history, is full of hearts that never stopped beating. You can let yours slow too. There's nothing more to do, no more poems to read, no more pots to fire, no more gods to thank, only stillness, only breath, only sleep.